Long before the golden thrones of Olympus were ever forged in the fires of divine ambition, while the enchanted mists of creation still swirled in a chaotic dance around the void, the cosmos trembled with the raw, untamed vibrancy of its own birth. It was in this primordial epoch that Hekate emerged, a deity born from a lineage far more ancient than the ruling gods of the mountain, stepping forth from the very womb of darkness and light. Her roots dig deep into the bedrock of the universe, tapping into those eldritch, elemental forces that shaped reality itself, rendering her one of the most enduring and unshakable powers within the entirety of the Greek pantheon. Unlike countless other deities who would later kneel before the thunderous might of Zeus or fade into the dusty forgotten annals of oblivion, Hecate's divine authority remained absolute, untouched, and undiminished by the great cosmic upheavals that sought to reshape the heavens. The foundational record of the divine family tree, the Theogony of Hesiod, places the moment of Hecate's genesis squarely within the age of the Titans, identifying her as the offspring of the second generation of cosmic powers, born of the union between Perses and Asteria. This parentage is not merely a detail of heritage, but the very definition of her identity. She's a goddess whose power flows from the fundamental forces that governed the universe long before the Olympian order was established. Her father, Perses, whose very name echoes with the sounds of destruction and the tearing of veils, commanded the darker, more ominous aspects of cosmic transformation. His dominion was not simply one of physical ruin, but of that necessary inexorable dissolution that must precede all rebirth, the shattering of old forms to clear the canvas for new creations. This Titan understood the profound truth that destruction and creation are not opposites, but merely different faces of the same eternal cosmic process. Her mother Asteria held within her celestial form the mysteries of the star-filled night and the prophetic power that flows through the velvet darkness. As the goddess of nocturnal oracles and falling stars, she possessed the ability to read the intricate patterns written in celestial fire and translate them into wisdom for those with the sight to see. Her profound connection to the falling stars resonates deeply with themes of piercing the veil between the realm of the gods and the understanding of mortals, carrying divine messages down to the earth. When Zeus, driven by his insatiable desire, pursued her across the heavens, Asteria chose the path of the wild and the free. Rather than submit to the king of the skies, she transformed herself into a quail and plunged into the depths of the vast, churning sea, eventually metamorphosing into the sacred island of Delos. This act of rebellious transformation would echo through the very soul of her daughter, for Hekate too would come to be identified with transmutation and the crossing of forbidden boundaries. The union of Perses and Asteria brought forth an entity unprecedented in the cosmic order. Their daughter inherited Perses's mastery over transformative destruction, and Asteria's command over the prophetic dark. Yet, within Hekate, these powers merged and evolved into something far more complex, far more profound. She emerged as the goddess of the liminal, the keeper of those threshold spaces where different realms of existence touch and bleed into one another. Her birth represented the cosmic principle that boundaries are not merely barriers to be feared, but places of immense power and potential for transformation. What truly distinguished Hekate from her Titan kin was her uncanny, almost impossible ability to retain, and indeed expand, her divine privileges during the violent rise of Zeus. When the king of Olympus toppled the Titans to establish his new cosmic hierarchy, most of the ancient powers found their authority violently curtailed or utterly annihilated. The Titans were cast into the gloom of the Tartarean pits, their dominions carved up and distributed among the allies and children of Zeus. Yet Hekate not only kept her powers, but received a clear and unequivocal confirmation of her triple dominion over the earth, the sea, and the sky from Zeus himself. This extraordinary arrangement stemmed from her unique position during the Titanomachy, the great war of the gods. Unlike the other Titans who raged against the ascension of Zeus, Hekate maintained a careful neutrality, walking the razor's edge of a wisdom that sees the future. She aided neither the old order nor actively supported the new with the sword. Instead, she positioned herself as a force beyond the conflict, superior to the squabbles of kings. This strategic stance reflected her essential nature as the goddess not of fixed territories, but of borders and transitions. While other gods fought for control of specific realms, Hekate claimed sovereignty over the gaps between them, the thresholds where one reality gives way to another. The decision of Zeus to grant Hekate privileges denied to all other Titans signifies an acknowledgement of her vital role in the machinery of the cosmos. This triple dominion over earth, sea and sky was not merely a political concession, but an admission of a fundamental truth regarding the nature of divine power. Every realm requires a guardian of its borders, a deity capable of overseeing the complex interactions between the different levels of reality. Upon the earth, Hekate presided over the crossroads, those fateful junctions where human paths diverge and destinies are irrevocably sealed. In the sea, she commanded the mysterious depths where life first sparked into being, and where the boundary between the known and the unknown remains forever fluid. In the sky, she ruled the vast emptiness between the stars, the ether through which divine messages travel, and where cosmic forces gather their might. Her stellar lineage, inherited through her mother Asteria, tethered Hekate to the fundamental patterns of cosmic order written in the movements of the celestial bodies. The ancient peoples understood well that the stars were not merely distant lights, but active participants in the cosmic drama, their positions and movements directly influencing events upon the terrestrial plane. Through her mother's blood, Hekate possessed the inherited capacity to read these stellar messages and transmute them into actionable wisdom. This connection to astral prophecy distinguished her from other oracular deities, who relied primarily on earthly signs and omens. The significance of her connection to her father, Perses, manifests in Hecate's role as the goddess of necessary endings and transformative destruction. While many gods presided over the processes of creation, growth, and preservation, Hekate knew that these positive forces required shadow counterparts to maintain the delicate balance of the cosmos. The legacy of Perses granted her authority over the processes of dissolution, decay, and entropy, processes that must occur to cleanse the world and make way for new life. This was not a malevolent destruction, but rather the essential cosmic function of clearing away the old to allow the new to breathe. Alternative genealogies, preserved in the whispers of various ancient sources, reveal different facets of Hecate's cosmic significance, suggesting that her true origins may be far more labyrinthine than Hesiod's narrative implies. Some traditions position her as the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, a parentage that would make her the sister of Persephone and place her deep within the agricultural cycles that govern mortal life. This lineage emphasizes her connection to the fertility of the soil and the seasonal patterns of death and rebirth that sustain human civilization. The parentage of Zeus and Demeter also creates intriguing parallels between Hekate and Persephone, both of whom are intimately associated with the underworld and the mysteries of return. In this version of her origins, Hecate's role as the guide and protector of Persephone during her annual journeys between the land of the dead and the land of the living takes on an added layer of poignancy. She appears not merely as a helpful ally, but as an elder sister fulfilling the primal duty of guarding her sibling during perilous transitions. Other traditions trace Hecate's lineage to even more primordial sources, naming Tartarus and Nyx as her divine parents. This genealogy places her among the most ancient cosmic forces, born from the union of the primordial abyss and the personification of night. Tartarus, that unfathomable pit which existed before the separation of earth and sky, represents the fundamental void from which all existence sprang. Nyx, the primal night whom even Zeus feared to offend, embodies the creative darkness that preceded and encompasses all light. If Hekate was indeed born of this most ancient coupling, her authority extends beyond the divine and into the realm of cosmic principles themselves. She would represent the active force emerging from the marriage of absolute void and creative darkness, the power that gives form to the formless and brings order to chaos. This lineage explains her unique ability to traverse and command all realms of existence, for she would be born of the forces that underlie all reality. Still other sources suggest a parentage defining Hekate as the daughter of the sea god Forces and his sister Ceto, placing her among the ancient marine deities who ruled the oceans before the rise of Poseidon. This lineage connects her to the primal waters where life first emerged, emphasizing her role as a goddess of transformation and metamorphosis. Forces and Ceto were known as the parents of many monstrous offspring, representing the raw, untamed forces of nature before they were constrained by the more familiar forms of classical mythology. The sheer diversity of these genealogical traditions suggests that Hecate's origins are too ancient, too fundamental to be captured by a single narrative. Each version unveils a different aspect of her cosmic weight, highlighting the various dimensions of her divine authority. Rather than contradicting one another, these alternative parentages represent different attempts to articulate the fact that Hekate embodies fundamental cosmic forces that predate and transcend the traditional categories of divine genealogy. Regardless of which lineage one accepts, her connection to stellar forces manifests in her role as a goddess who bridges the gap between cosmic and terrestrial matters. The stars and planets were understood not as distant objects, but as active participants in earthly affairs, their movements influencing everything from individual human fates to the rise and fall of kingdoms. Hecate's ability to read and interpret these celestial influences made her an indispensable intermediary between the divine will and mortal comprehension. The transformative power inherited from her various possible fathers remains consistent across all genealogical traditions. Whether derived from the destructive might of Perses, the sovereign authority of Zeus, the primal void of Tartarus, or the marine metamorphosis of forces, this aspect of her nature remains constant. Hekate possesses the power to facilitate fundamental changes in the nature of reality, overseeing the processes where one state of existence yields to another. Her maternal heritage, though varying more distinctly across traditions, consistently emphasizes prophetic wisdom and a connection to the hidden aspects of existence. From Asteria comes the ability to read star omens and interpret the messages written in falling stars. From Demeter flows a deep knowledge of the Earth's cycles and the mysteries of agricultural transformation. From Nyx derives mastery over the creative darkness that holds all potentiality. From Ceto comes an understanding of the primal waters and the power to dissolve and reshape all forms. These diverse genealogical traditions reflect the complexity of Hecate's role in Greek religious thought, and her evolution from a relatively minor titanic goddess into one of the most widely revered deities of the ancient world. Each tradition preserves a fragment of this enchanted story, weaving together a tapestry of a goddess who stands at the centre of the cosmic web, holding the keys to the universe's deepest mysteries. The myriad facets of Hecate's enchanting and primordial nature have undergone a profound metamorphosis through the eons, shaped and reshaped by the spiritual needs and deepening comprehension of civilizations that rose and fell under her gaze. The evolution of this most distinctive manifestation of the goddess began in the mists of the Archaic period, those ancient days when Greek artisans first attempted to capture her ineffable complexity within the cold, unyielding surfaces of stone and bronze. The earliest depictions were simpler, presenting her as a single-bodied deity, standing solitary with torches or keys in hand. Yet, as humanity's understanding of her cosmic weight expanded, the mystics and sculptors of the age birthed a revolutionary iconography known as the Hecatean, the triple-bodied form. This tripartite depiction arose from a practical and spiritual necessity: the need to visualize a divine consciousness capable of perceiving all temporal dimensions and spatial directions simultaneously. The triple form resolved a fundamental paradox in representing Hecate's unique attributes. Unlike other deities who governed specific domains or operated within the constraints of linear time, Hekate existed in a state of perpetual, infinite awareness, encompassing the past, the present, and the future as a unified whole. Her divine perception operated far beyond the linear march of hours, allowing her to witness the consequences of actions before they were ever taken, and to comprehend the deep, hidden patterns that weave together events separated by centuries. Arranged often in a triangular phalanx standing back to back, the three bodies of the Hecateans served as a visual metaphor, allowing the observer to grasp her state of temporal omniscience. Each figure in this trinity held distinct attributes corresponding to her awareness of time. The face gazing into the past typically clutched a key, symbolizing her role as the warden of ancient wisdom and forgotten lore, the guardian of secrets buried in the sands of time. The figure focused on the present moment usually held a burning torch, illuminating the immediate conditions and revealing the hidden truths of the now. The aspect turned toward the future often wielded a dagger or a serpent, representing the severing of illusions and the transformative power required to navigate the shifting tides of what is to come. The positioning of these three forms created a powerful and sacred geometry, perfectly reflecting Hecate's absolute dominion over the crossroads, To the ancient Greeks, crossroads were far more than mere physical intersections where dirt paths met. They were enchanted liminal spaces where different possibilities converged and where the very fabric of fate could be altered. The meeting of three roads, known as the Triodos, was particularly sacred to Hekate, for it represented the ultimate moment of choice, that precipice where a traveller must select one of three diverging paths, each leading to a radically different destiny. Statues of Hekate were typically erected at these three-way junctions, their triple forms allowing the goddess to watch over all approaching roads simultaneously. Travellers encountering these monuments would feel, in the very marrow of their bones, that they stood in a place of power where Hecate's influence was most potent. The goddess perceived not only their intended destination, but also the alternative paths they might have chosen, and the rippling consequences of each potential future. This quality rendered the crossroads an ideal theatre for prophecy, decision-making and rituals designed to commune with the divine. The sacred geometry of her triple form extended beyond mere representation into the realm of high magic. The triangular arrangement of her three bodies created a contained field which practitioners believed could trap and focus supernatural energies. Rituals performed within the boundaries of this triangular invocation were thought to gain additional potency from Hecate's concentrated presence. The 3 points of the triangle corresponded to the 3 realms of her dominion, earth, sea, and sky, thereby forming a microcosm of her cosmic authority. Archaeological evidence unearthed from every corner of the Greek world testifies to the widespread adoption of the Hecatean form. These monuments range from small, intimate household shrines to colossal public installations, yet they consistently maintained that fundamental three-bodied structure. The largest examples, standing as sentinels at the great crossroads outside city walls, were tall enough to be seen from considerable distances, serving as landmarks that reminded weary travellers of the goddess's protective and watchful presence. In many of these triple-form depictions, the keys Hekate clutches embody her title as Kleidushos, the key-bearer. She is the eternal warden waiting at the thresholds between different states of existence. These were no ordinary keys, but sacred instruments forged from celestial metals, etched with symbols that shifted in meaning depending on the spiritual maturity of the observer. Her mastery over thresholds extended far beyond physical gates, encompassing every conceivable form of transition and metamorphosis. Birth, death, marriage, initiation into the mysteries, and the passage from childhood to adulthood, all fell within her jurisdiction as the guardian of life's great thresholds. The key she held represented her absolute authority to grant or deny passage through these vital transitions. Mothers labouring in childbirth would call upon her to unlock the threshold between the womb and the world. The dying would pray for her guidance as they drifted from the realm of the living to the shores of the dead. Initiates sought her favour to unlock the doors of sacred knowledge. The symbolism of the key was also intrinsically linked to her role as the keeper of occult knowledge and hidden wisdom. The ancient mystery cults taught that certain truths could only be revealed to those possessing the proper spiritual keys to unlock them. Hecate's keys represented the accumulated wisdom necessary to comprehend the deeper mysteries of existence, wisdom that included the laws of herbalism, the techniques of prophecy, the communion with spirits, and the manipulation of supernatural forces. The torches borne by Hekate established her identity as Phosphoros, the light bringer, she who illuminates the darkness and exposes hidden realities. Unlike the blinding, scorching light of solar deities like Apollo, Hecate's torches provided a subtler, more mystical illumination that revealed rather than overwhelmed. Her light penetrated the shadows where secrets were kept, bringing clarity to confusion without destroying the essential mystery. This quality made her the ideal guide for those seeking wisdom in the darker, more obscure corners of existence. The specific type of torch associated with Hekate was typically fashioned from pine, a wood sacred to her due to its resinous nature and its ability to burn with a bright, steady flame even in the most adverse conditions. The evergreen nature of the pine also symbolized the eternal aspect of her wisdom, which remained constant through all seasonal changes and historical upheavals. Archaeological remains of ritual sites dedicated to Hekate frequently contain evidence of pine torch usage, including distinctive ash deposits and bronze torch holders designed specifically for her ceremonies. Her torches served functions that were as practical as they were symbolic in ancient religious practice. The nocturnal rituals dedicated to Hekate required artificial light, and her sacred torches provided an illumination believed to be spiritually purified and magically empowered. The flames were thought to create a barrier against malevolent spirits, while simultaneously attracting beneficial supernatural forces. Participants in Hecate's mysteries would carry smaller versions of her torches during processions and ceremonies, creating moving rivers of sacred light flowing through the darkness. The dagger or knife, often depicted in Hecate's hands, represented the power to cut through illusions and sever unwanted ties. This was not a weapon of crude violence, but a tool of spiritual surgery capable of excising harmful influences, breaking destructive patterns, and clearing obstacles that hindered the soul's growth. Ancient practitioners understood that transformation often requires the violent excision of old forms so that the new may emerge, and Hecate's dagger symbolized her will to perform this necessary function. The serpents associated with Hekate connected her to ancient wisdom traditions that recognized these creatures as symbols of transformation, healing, and chthonic knowledge. Snakes shed their skins in a process that mirrored the spiritual transmutation Hekate facilitated in her devotees. Their ability to move between the underworld and the surface made them natural symbols for a goddess who traversed all levels of existence. Ancient sources describe Hekate as being accompanied by serpents during her nightly journeys, and serpentine imagery frequently appears on artifacts associated with her worship. A distinctive symbol known as the strophalos, or Hecate's wheel, consisting of a serpentine triple spiral enclosed within a circle, became one of her most recognizable emblems during the Hellenistic period. This complex symbol encoded multi-layered meanings regarding her cosmic functions. The outer circle represented the unity of her triple nature and her role as the goddess who defines boundaries. The inner triple spiral evoked the dynamic movement of her consciousness through past, present, and future, as well as the cyclical nature of the transformation she oversaw. The mathematical precision of the strophalos reflected the ancient understanding of sacred geometry and its relationship to divine power. The three arms of the spiral were positioned at intervals of exactly 120 degrees, creating perfect balance and harmony within the circular boundary. It was believed that this geometric perfection focused and amplified Hecate's power when the symbol was properly constructed and consecrated. Archaeological evidence shows that strophalos symbols were carved onto boundary stones, painted onto ritual vessels, and worn as protective amulets across the entire ancient Mediterranean world. Dogs held a unique and sacred position among the animals associated with Hekate. They served as the goddess's constant companions and active participants in her divine functions. Unlike the symbolic animals of other gods, Hecate's dogs were understood to be actual supernatural entities, not mere abstractions. Ancient sources describe these divine canines as possessing intelligence and capabilities far beyond those of ordinary dogs, including the capacity to perceive spirits, foresee future events, and act as messengers between the mortal and divine realms. The night processions of Hekate, known as the Deepna, were mysterious events in which dogs played prominent roles as both participants and sacrifices. These enigmatic nocturnal gatherings were said to take place at crossroads during the dark phase of the moon, the time when Hecate's power reached its zenith. Witnesses reported seeing processions of spectral figures accompanied by ghostly hounds, moving silently through the darkness. The living dogs that participated in these ceremonies were specially trained and consecrated animals, purported to have the sight required to see and interact with the supernatural attendees. The role of dogs as sacrifices in Hecate's worship represented one of the most distinctive aspects of her cultic practice. While most Greek gods received offerings of a different nature, the connection between the hound and the mistress of the night was sealed in blood and mystery. While the other Olympians might accept the bleating sheep, the wandering goat, or the lowing ox as common oblations upon their altars, Hekate, in the unnerving silence of her rituals, required a more sanguine tribute, the sacrifice of the hound. These were not haphazard slaughters performed without thought, but rather carefully orchestrated ceremonies that demanded specific breeds of canines, distinct methods of preparation, and precise temporal alignments that moved in rhythm with the turning of the heavens. It was believed that the spirits of these sacrificed dogs did not simply vanish into the ether, but were transmuted into guardians and guides for those souls attempting to navigate the misty, treacherous passage between worlds. Their essences were thought to join Hecate's own supernatural pack, running forever alongside the goddess in the realm of eternity. This profound bond between the canine and the divine was not limited to the context of ritual slaughter, but extended deep into the mysterious domains of practical magic and prophecy. The ancient practitioners held a fervent belief that dogs possessed an innate, biological sensitivity to supernatural forces, serving as living, breathing early warning systems against spiritual peril. Unusual behaviour displayed by a dog, a mournful howl directed at the empty darkness where no physical form stood, a stubborn refusal to cross a threshold into a specific area, or sudden, inexplicable tremors of fear in a place that seemed safe to human eyes, was interpreted as definitive proof of a supernatural stir, a sign that Hekate herself was moving unseen through the shadows. Throughout the breadth of the ancient world, the epithets and titles bestowed upon Hekate served to unveil the extraordinary magnitude of her divine influence and the deep, trembling reverence she commanded from a vast array of communities. The title of Kleidoushos, the keybearer, underscored her fundamental role as the warden of thresholds and the guardian of boundaries. This inscription appears on stone tablets and votive offerings across the entirety of the Greek world, signalling a universal recognition of her authority over all forms of transition and transmutation. This epithet carried a weight that was not merely religious, but also deeply legalistic. For Hekate was often invoked in the drafting of contracts and treaties, called upon to ensure that all parties remained true to their pledges, sealing the threshold where a mere negotiation transforms into a binding, unbreakable covenant. The title of Phosphoros, the Lightbringer, sharply distinguished her illuminating function from the more obvious scorching solar associations of gods like Apollo. Her light was not the blinding glare of noon, but the subtle, piercing radiance of revelation and profound understanding, the light of truth that shines most brilliantly in the heart of darkness. This epithet frequently surfaces in contexts related to the mystery religions and the acquisition of esoteric knowledge, emphasizing her role as the guide who leads seekers toward hidden verities. It also tethered her to the morning star and to those other celestial phenomena that bridge the delicate divide between the night and the coming day. Her designation as Chthoniya, she of the earth, established her visceral connection to the subterranean powers and the realm that lies beneath our feet. This title reinforced her role as a goddess who understood and governed the hidden currents operating beneath the surface of ordinary reality. The chthonic deities were of singular importance in Greek religion, for they controlled the fundamental forces of fertility, death, and rebirth that sustain all existence. The title, Chthoniya, marked Hekate as one of the most potent members of this vital category of divinity. Yet it was the title Anassa Eneroi, the Queen of Ghosts, that revealed perhaps the most enigmatic and spine-chilling aspect of her divine nature. This epithet acknowledged her absolute sovereignty over the souls of the dead and her role as the leader of those supernatural entities that exist in the grey spaces between life and death. Ancient texts depict her commanding vast spectral armies of restless shades, demons, and other eldritch beings, executing her will across the mortal plane. This title appears most frequently in the magical papyri and in texts concerning the art of necromancy and spirit communication, demonstrating her specific and paramount importance in the workings of practical magic. The sacred geography of ancient Greece was punctuated by countless three-way intersections known as the triodos, and each of these points marked a location where Hecate's influence reached its most intense concentration. These crossroads were far more than simple junctions of dirt and stone where traffic met. They were understood as portals where the boundaries between different realms of existence became porous, allowing for communication and transit between the mortal world and the supernatural dimensions beyond. The physical structure of these intersections, where three roads converged into one, created a natural sanctuary, forming a triangle that ancient practitioners recognized as a fundamental geometric pattern capable of trapping and focusing divine power. The placement of the Hecateans, the statues of Hekate, at these triodos, was governed by strict religious protocols that had evolved over centuries of cultic practice. These three-formed effigies were not positioned at random. Rather, they were oriented with extreme care, based on astronomical observations and geographical features designed to amplify their spiritual efficacy. The three faces of each Hecatean were aligned to gaze down each of the three converging roads simultaneously, ensuring that the goddess could observe all approaching travellers and the spiritual forces accompanying them. This panoptical positioning allowed Hekate to serve as both protector and judge, offering guidance to those who approached with pure intentions while repelling any malevolent entities that might threaten the community. The construction of these monuments required the skills of specialized artisans who understood both the technical challenges of hewing durable stone and the religious necessities of properly consecrating a sacred object. Archaeological evidence recovered from sites across the Mediterranean reveals that while Hekations were typically carved from local indigenous rock, they embodied specific design elements that remained consistent regardless of regional artistic styles. The three bodies were invariably placed back to back, creating a central contained column believed to hold the concentrated essence of the divine presence. The faces were carved with particular attention to the eyes, which were often inlaid with different materials to enhance their symbolic capacity to perceive supernatural phenomena. The ritual consecration of a new Hecatean involved complex ceremonies that could span several days and required the participation of multiple religious specialists. These rites of dedication began with purification liturgies that cleansed both the statue and the crossroads itself of any negative influences that might interfere with the manifestation of the goddess. Priests and priestesses would intone specific incantations designed to invite the consciousness of Hekate to take up residence within the stone form, transforming it from a mere sculpture into an active living vessel of divinity. The final stage of consecration involved the offering of specially prepared foods and the kindling of sacred fires that were to be kept burning for prescribed periods of time. Once duly sanctified and positioned, these Hecateans became focal points for ongoing religious activity that extended far beyond formal ceremonies. Wayfarers would regularly pause at these crossroads shrines to seek Hecate's protection for their journeys, leaving small oblations of food, wildflowers, or coins in exchange for safe passage. Merchants concluding business deals would meet at the Triodos to invoke Hekate, knowing that the goddess's watchful gaze would prevent fraud and ensure fair commerce, blessing their transactions. Local communities organised the regular maintenance of these shrines, viewing their upkeep as vital for ensuring the continued spiritual protection that Hekate provided to the entire region. The strategic importance of crossroads in ancient warfare led to the development of specialised military rituals invoking Hecate's protection for armies and fortifications. Generals would order the construction of temporary Hecations near battlefields, believing that the goddess's presence would confound enemy forces and grant tactical advantages to those who honoured her properly. These martial applications of crossroads worship demonstrate how deeply Hecate's influence permeated every facet of ancient life, ranging from personal spiritual practices to matters of state security and military strategy. Hecate's function as a psychopompos, a guide for souls transitioning between different states of existence, represented one of her most vital roles in ancient Greek religious thought. Unlike other guide gods such as Hermes, who primarily assisted souls in their initial journey from life to the shores of death, Hekate specialized in the far more complex transitions that occurred within the underworld itself. She guided souls through the various stages of their subterranean existence, helping them navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth of Hades' dominion and ensuring they reached their ultimate destinations based on their earthly deeds and spiritual evolution. This process of soul guidance under Hecate's supervision began at the very moment of death. She would appear at the dying person's final breath to assess the spiritual state of the departing shade and determine the appropriate path for its afterlife journey. Ancient sources describe her manifesting in different forms depending on the nature of the soul in question. To those who had lived virtuous lives and honoured the gods, she appeared as a compassionate torch-bearing guide, illuminating their path through the gloom of death. However, to souls burdened by guilt or unresolved spiritual debts, she manifested in far more terrifying, nightmarish visages, reflecting their own inner turmoil and the difficult ordeals they would need to face to achieve spiritual purification. Her guidance extended beyond individual souls to encompass entire categories of the dead who required special assistance. Warriors who had fallen in the chaos of battle, whose violent deaths often left them confused and disoriented in the afterlife, received particular attention from Hekate. She would gather these martial spirits and lead them through rituals of spiritual catharsis, helping them release their attachment to earthly conflict and accept their new existence among the honoured dead. Women who died in childbirth, another category of souls requiring delicate care, were guided by Hekate through special processes that allowed them to understand and accept their untimely severance from their earthly families. The practices of necromancy associated with Hecate's function as psychopompos evolved into sophisticated techniques for establishing communication between the living and the dead. These were not crude attempts to disturb the peace of the departed, but rather carefully structured rituals designed to facilitate beneficial exchanges between the two realms. Practitioners of necromancy under Hecate's patronage understood that the dead possessed knowledge and perspectives that could be invaluable to the living, particularly regarding future events and truths hidden from mortal perception. The technical requirements for successful necromantic communication were exceedingly high, demanding years of rigorous training under competent masters. Initiates had to master complex purification rituals that ensured they remained safe from being overwhelmed or corrupted by their interactions with supernatural forces. They needed to learn the precise formulas for summoning specific types of spirits and the appropriate offerings that would persuade the dead to share their knowledge voluntarily. Most importantly, they had to cultivate a delicate spiritual sensitivity, a discernment necessary to distinguish between genuine communications from departed souls and the deceptive messages of malevolent entities seeking to exploit the necromantic connection. As for the locations chosen for these necromantic rituals, the geography of the necromantic arts was never a matter of happenstance. Rather, the locations chosen for these shadowed rituals were selected with an exacting, almost geomantic precision, determined by their natural resonance with the chthonic energies and their profound mystical alignment with Hecate's dominion. While the crossroads, by their very nature as liminal fractures in the landscape, provided the ideal theatre for the gathering of restless spirits, other topographies served specific esoteric purposes within the grim catalogue of necromancy. Caverns and deep subterranean hollows were sought after for rituals involving the most ancient of spirits, or for those perilous quests seeking knowledge of the deepest existential mysteries. For these dark stone throats were viewed as the very breathing channels of the underworld, places where the exhalations of the abyss rose to mingle with the air of the living. The desolate stretches of sea cliffs and the marshy banks of winding rivers were chosen for communing with those who had perished beneath the waves, or spirits bound by ancient pacts to the water deities. The fluidity of the water was understood to be a potent conductor, a liquid wire capable of carrying the spectral voices of the drowned from the deep silence to the ears of the mage. Battlefields, soaked in the iron tang of blood, and other ill-omened grounds where violent, untimely deaths had occurred, became the necessary workshops for practitioners seeking contact with the shades of fallen warriors or the vengeful, restless ghosts of murder victims. The temporal orchestration of these necromantic rites adhered to rigid astronomical and religious calendars, calculated to maximize the thinning of the veil between worlds. The phase of the new moon, that time when the heavens were stripped of their silver light and the sky hung as a velvet void, was universally acknowledged as the most propitious moment. This absolute darkness was not merely an absence of light, but a positive presence that amplified Hecate's power, while diminishing the burning, purifying gaze of the solar gods who might otherwise interfere with subterranean operations. Specific seasonal fulcrums, particularly the time surrounding the autumn equinox, when the world itself begins to die and wither, were believed to render the barrier between the living and the dead permeable, making communication not only easier but far more reliable. The anniversaries of significant deaths were also marked as auspicious for these dark works, for it was held that on these dates, the specific shade in question was magnetically drawn closer to the mortal plane, hovering just beyond the reach of the senses. Yet, Hecate's stewardship over thresholds extended far beyond the dramatic, mist-shrouded examples of crossroads and necromantic circles, reaching into the very heart of the mundane daily experience of the ancient Greek world. Every doorway, whether it opened into a humble private dwelling, a bustling public edifice, or the sacred silence of a temple, fell under her protective, unblinking gaze. This guardianship was far more than a poetic metaphor. It represented an active, divine intelligence capable of influencing the fortune and safety of all who passed through the frame. The ancients understood with a visceral clarity that a doorway is a breach in a wall, a vulnerable point where the chaotic, malevolent forces of the outside world might seek entry into the sanctuary of the home. Thus, Hecate's role as the warden of the door was a vital necessity for maintaining both physical security and spiritual purity. The architectural vernacular of Greek antiquity reflected this deep theological understanding of Hecate's liminal power through specific design elements intended to anchor her protective presence to the stone and wood. door frames were frequently adorned with the iconography of the goddess, keys to lock away danger, torches to burn away the lurking shadows, and the triple spiral to serve as a permanent invitation for her threefold consciousness. The thresholds themselves were often constructed from materials deemed sacred to her, or embedded with apotropaic amulets charged to channel her power. Even the iron hinges and the heavy locks were consecrated with specific incantations and anointed with sacred oils, a ritual act calling down her blessing upon every soul who crossed the boundary. The domestic rituals associated with Hecate's role as the guardian of the threshold created a complex woven system of household piety that involved every member of the family in the maintenance of divine favour. Brides, crossing the threshold of their marital home for the very first time, participated in solemn ceremonies invoking Hecate's blessing upon their transition from the state of maidenhood to that of wife and matriarch. Children reaching the age of maturity underwent rites of passage at the doorway, marking their evolution from the innocence of youth to the heavy responsibilities of adulthood under the goddess's watchful eye. Even the most banal of daily activities, leaving the house to labour in the fields or returning to the hearth at twilight, were accompanied by brief, murmured prayers and small libations, a constant rhythmic acknowledgement of Hecate's enduring shield. The protection of the city gates represented a macrocosmic version of this domestic guardianship, binding entire populations to the collective necessity of Hecate's favour. These colossal portals, controlling access to the urban heart, were understood as critical spiritual choke points where the safety and prosperity of thousands hung in the balance. The construction of a city's gates typically involved the establishment of permanent shrines or temples dedicated to Hekate, featuring elaborate sculptural programs depicting her various attributes and cosmic functions. These gateway temples served as the focal points for communal religious activity, standing as visible, stone assurances to every traveller entering the city that they were passing under the careful scrutiny of the Titaness. The martial aspects of this gate guardianship gave rise to a specialised caste of warrior priests who fused military discipline with deep theological expertise in Hecate's mysteries. These guardians were charged with maintaining the spiritual defences of the city gates through a regimen of daily rituals and sacrifices. Yet they were also trained combatants, capable of providing physical defence should the supernatural protections be tested by flesh and blood armies. Their dual role reflected the ancient wisdom that true defence requires a synthesis of the spiritual and the material, and that the blessing of Hekate was the foundation upon which all other fortifications rested. In the gloom of the moonless nights, the offering of evening suppers, known as the Dipna, at the three-way crossroads represented the most widespread and enduring form of popular devotion to Hekate across the ancient world. These were not the pompous, gold-laden ceremonies of the great state temples led by professional hierarchs, but simple, profound acts of piety performed by ordinary people without the need for expensive apparatus or esoteric training. The accessibility of the Dipna rituals played a crucial role in cementing the goddess's worship among the lower social classes, those who might otherwise find themselves excluded from the elite circles of formal religious practice. The preparation of the Dipna meals followed traditional recipes handed down through generations of practitioners, allowing for regional variations while strictly preserving the core elements deemed essential for the goddess's acceptance. The fundamental ingredients typically included bread, eggs, fish, honey cakes, and garlic. Each component was selected for its deep symbolic resonance, as well as its availability to the common man. Bread represented the sustenance Hekate provided to her faithful. Eggs symbolized the cosmic potential for life and the mystery of transformation. Fish connected the offering to her dominion over the primordial depths of the sea. Honeycakes acknowledged the sweet protection she offered to those who honoured her, and the pungent bulbs of garlic served as both a flavouring agent and a powerful apotropaic tool to ward off the parasitic spirits that might seek to steal or corrupt the offering. The ritual procedures for presenting the Dipna were defined with rigorous precision, demanding careful attention to timing, placement, and proper invocation. The practitioner would prepare the meal while the sun still held the sky, but they would wait for the heavy cloak of absolute night to fall before transporting it to the chosen crossroads. The approach to the triodos, the junction of three roads, had to be undertaken in total, heavy silence, for it was believed that any spoken word during the journey would shatter the ritual's potency. Upon reaching the nexus, the devotee would place the food at the exact geometric centre, where the three paths converged and then retreat immediately. The rule of retreating without looking back was absolute and terrifyingly vital. To turn one's gaze back toward the crossroads was to risk witnessing Hekate herself, or the horrific spectral pack of hounds and spirits that trailed in her wake, a sight that the ancients believed would result in immediate madness or death. The communal aspects of the Deepna practice created a web of shared religious obligation that strengthened the social fabric while honouring the goddess. Neighbours would coordinate their offerings to ensure that the local crossroads received regular attention, and families passed down the responsibility of maintaining specific shrines from one generation to the next. These informal religious networks ensured the continuity of spiritual protection, while providing a system of social support that bound the community together in times of hardship. The profound and intricate relationship between Hekate and Persephone began in a moment of cosmic cataclysm that would forever reshape the divine order and establish one of the most enduring partnerships in Greek mythology. When Hades, the lord of the dead, burst forth from the subterranean realm to seize Persephone as she gathered flowers in the meadows of Nysa, the very earth trembled with the violence of his exit. The ground split open with a thunderous crack that echoed through the heavens. Yet, of all the gods who might have witnessed this dramatic abduction, only Hekate possessed the supernatural acuity to perceive Persephone's desperate cries for help as she was dragged down into the gloom. The ancient Homeric hymn to Demeter provides the most detailed account of Hecate's vital role in these events, recounting that she was the only one among the immortals to hear the maiden's voice as it pierced the barriers between worlds. This was no mere coincidence of proximity, but a manifestation of Hecate's unique nature as a goddess, whose consciousness operated simultaneously across multiple planes of reality. While other gods were bound by the traditional borders of their specific domains, Hecate's triple authority over earth, sea, and sky allowed her to perceive events occurring in the liminal empty spaces between these realms. The moment she heard Persephone's scream was a turning point in her cosmic trajectory, transforming her from a relatively independent deity into an active participant in the great drama of seasonal change and agricultural renewal. Her supernatural hearing was not simply a matter of enhanced auditory perception. It represented her fundamental connection to the agony and transformation that occur during great cosmic transitions. The anguish in Persephone's voice resonated with Hecate's own deep understanding of the painful necessity of crossing thresholds and abandoning familiar forms of existence. Hecate's immediate response to Persephone's plight demonstrated the practical application of her skills as a psychopompos, a guide of souls, in a crisis that transcended the ordinary categories of death and rebirth. Unlike the permanent transition from life to death over which she typically presided, Persephone's situation involved a forced descent into a realm where she would survive, yet be fundamentally altered by the experience. This unprecedented scenario required Hekate to develop new techniques for tracking and communicating with a spirit existing in a state of suspension between mortal and immortal existence. The search for Persephone that followed the abduction revealed the full scope of Hecate's investigative powers and her willingness to venture into perilous territories to fulfill her obligations as a divine ally. When Demeter began her frantic, earth-scorching quest to find her lost daughter, Hekate emerged from her usual haunts at the crossroads and thresholds to offer her specialized knowledge and supernatural resources. Her decision to actively join this search represented a significant expansion of her traditional role. She moved from being a passive guardian of boundaries to becoming an active agent of rescue and restoration. The partnership forged between Hekate and Demeter during the searching phase of this myth established a template for divine collaboration that would echo through the ages. The searing, visceral intensity of Demeter's mother grief, sharpened by a desperation that could wither the very crops in the fields, found its perfect counterweight in Hecate's methodological, almost surgical approach to supernatural investigation. This union of fire and ice, of raw emotional motivation and cold technical expertise, forged a formidable team against which few powers in the cosmos could stand. Their collaboration became a living testament to how distinct and seemingly contradictory forms of divine power could be woven together to unravel complexities that no single deity, however powerful, could resolve in isolation. This alliance was destined to establish a paradigm that would echo through the myth cycles and religious practices of the coming ages, a blueprint for divine cooperation in the face of the unthinkable. The tracking methods Hekate employed in the search for the lost maiden were far removed from simple fortune-telling or the vague, riddle-filled visions of lesser oracles. They were a masterclass in sophisticated occult forensics. Her approach combined a systematic, inch-by-inch scouring of the physical world with the strategic interrogation of supernatural informants who might harbour fragments of the truth. She summoned and questioned the drifting shades of the recently dead who had just arrived in the gloomy kingdom of Hades, sifting through their confused memories for any sign of a royal abduction or unauthorized entry into the underworld. She held counsel with the nervous nymphs and minor nature spirits who dwelled in those remote, eerie corners of the world, where the boundaries between realms naturally thin and the veil grows transparent, gathering intelligence on any tremors or disturbances in the cosmic order that might have gone unnoticed by the high gods of the mountain. Simultaneously, the goddess utilized her unparalleled mastery over liminal spaces to conduct reconnaissance missions that extended to the very bleeding edge of the underworld, venturing to the precipice of Hades' domain, without yet fully committing to the descent. These perilous expeditions required her to navigate the treacherous borderlands where the laws of the upper world and the chthonic depths overlap, places where the very fabric of reality shudders and warps. These were zones of extreme supernatural instability, environments so hostile and disorienting that they could shatter the fragile architecture of an unprepared mind. Hecate's ability not only to survive in these hostile territories, but to operate with efficiency and clarity demonstrated the full, terrifying scope of her authority over transitions, and her unique competence to mediate between the disparate realms of the cosmos. The great fracture in the case, the moment the investigation turned from a desperate search into a focused pursuit, occurred when Hecate's meticulous inquiries led her to the chariot of Helios, the all-seeing titan of the sun. His daily journey across the dome of the heavens granted Helios the unique capacity to witness every event that transpired upon the surface of the known world. Hecate's approach to the sun god revealed her supreme diplomatic finesse and her innate understanding of how to navigate the complex, often fragile web of relationships between different categories of divinity. Rather than demanding information as a right or attempting to coerce cooperation through sorcerous means, she framed her inquiry in terms that appealed to Helios' sense of cosmic justice and his concern for the maintenance of proper order among the divine families. It was a victory not of brute force, but of ancient calculating wisdom, when Helios revealed the shattering truth that Hades had indeed abducted Persephone, and that he had done so with the silent complicit nod of Zeus himself. The crisis entered a volatile new phase, requiring entirely different strategies and alliances. The knowledge that the abduction had occurred with the sanction of the king of the gods transformed what had initially appeared to be a crime of passion into a complex game of political chess involving the highest tiers of divine authority. Hecate's reaction to this shocking betrayal demonstrated her profound grasp of celestial politics, and her ability to adapt her methods instantaneously to shifting circumstances. The critical intelligence provided by the Sun Titan allowed Hekate to direct Demeter's subsequent moves with a precision and effectiveness that blind rage alone could never have achieved. Armed with knowledge regarding Persephone's precise location and the conditions of her captivity, Hekate was able to counsel Demeter on the most promising strategies to secure her daughter's release. This guidance proved vital during Demeter's tense, earth-shattering negotiations with Zeus and the other Olympians. For Hecate's insights into the conditions of the underworld and the motivations of Hades provided the essential intelligence needed to craft diplomatic approaches that the Lord of the Dead could not easily dismiss. The resolution of the Persephone crisis through the establishment of the seasonal cycle created a new cosmic order that required constant management and vigilant oversight. The decree of Zeus, which stated that Persephone would spend one portion of the year in the shadowed halls of the underworld with Hades and the remainder in the light of the upper world with her mother, represented a compromise that satisfied the immediate demands of all warring parties. Yet, this decision also birthed an unprecedented situation requiring careful supervision to function successfully. The appointment of Hekate as the perpetual companion and guide to Persephone during her transitions between the world above and the world below reflected both her proven capabilities during the crisis and her unique qualifications to manage this ongoing cyclical responsibility. Her role extended far beyond that of a mere escort or guard. It encompassed the comprehensive support necessary for Persephone to acclimate to her dual existence. This support involved helping the young queen maintain her divine identity and powers, while adapting to the radically different conditions that prevailed in each realm. The practical challenges of Persephone's seasonal migrations were far more complex than they might appear on the surface. Each journey between worlds required careful preparation and precise timing to ensure the maintenance of the cosmic balance, and to guarantee that neither realm suffered undue harm during the Queen's absence. Hecate's responsibilities included monitoring the supernatural conditions that might affect the safety and success of these crossings, coordinating with other deities whose domains were impacted by Persephone's movements, and providing emotional and spiritual buttressing during a process that, while mandatory, remained a traumatic severance for the mother and daughter alike. The partnership that evolved between Hekate and Persephone created a potent alliance that amplified the effectiveness of both goddesses, merging their complementary talents into a unified force. Persephone's authority over the growth and renewal of botanical life, combined with Hecate's mastery over transformation and the crossing of borders, created a comprehensive system for managing the cycles of death and rebirth that govern all natural processes. Their collaboration set new precedents for how divine partnerships could be structured to handle complex cosmic responsibilities, moving beyond simple hierarchy into a realm of symbiotic power. The influence of this alliance rippled outward to touch the entire ancient world through the establishment of the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most significant and widespread mystery religion of classical antiquity. These secret religious rites, which promised initiates spiritual transformation and a blessed afterlife, drew their power directly from the mythic relationship between Demeter, Persephone, and Hekate. The mysteries utilized dramatic reenactments of the abduction and rescue narrative to guide participants through their own symbolic deaths and rebirths, with Hekate serving as the divine guide who ushered them through this transformative process. Hecate's role in the Eleusinian Mysteries elevated her to the status of one of the most pivotal deities in the mystery religions of the Mediterranean world. Her function as a psychopompos or soul guide, and her mentorship during transformative experiences made her an indispensable figure in religious systems that promise spiritual advancement through ritual participation. The mysteries taught that Hecate's guidance was available not only to mythic figures like Persephone, but also to mortal initiates who approached her with proper preparation and sincere devotion. The seasonal aspects of the Persephone myth tethered Hekate to the agricultural cycles that sustained human civilization across the ancient world. Her role in facilitating Persephone's annual transits gave her authority over the timing and success of planting, growth, harvest, and the fallow periods that determined whether communities would feast or face famine. This agricultural dimension of her power made her worship essential for farming communities, positioning her as a goddess whose favour was necessary for basic survival. Furthermore, the chthonic connections established through her partnership with Persephone enhanced Hecate's authority over the practices of necromancy and communication with the dead. Her deep, intimate knowledge of the geography and politics of the underworld, gained through her regular escort duties, made her an invaluable resource for practitioners seeking to contact departed spirits or gain knowledge about the conditions awaiting the living after death. This expertise elevated her status among practitioners of the magical arts, contributing to her reputation as the preeminent goddess of supernatural workings. The psychological dimensions of Hecate's relationship with Persephone reflected an ancient understanding of the traumatic effects of forced transformation and the vital importance of supportive guidance during the recovery from such experiences. While Persephone's abduction represented an archetypal instance of normal development being interrupted by violence, Hecate's ongoing support demonstrated the healing power of compassionate guidance from one who understands the complexity of liminal existence. This aspect of their relationship provided a model for human relationships involving recovery from trauma and adaptation to unwanted change. The mythic partnership between these goddesses also established significant precedents for feminine divine collaboration and mutual support. Unlike many Greek myths that depicted goddesses as rivals competing for male attention or divine privileges, the Hekate-Persephone alliance demonstrated how female divine power could be enhanced through cooperation rather than diminished by competition. Their partnership created a model of sisterhood that influenced both religious practices and social relationships across the ancient world. The cosmic implications of their alliance extended beyond seasonal change to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of transformation, the relationship between different states of existence, and the possibility of maintaining a coherent identity while adapting to radically different conditions. Hecate's guidance of Persephone through her dual existence provided a template for understanding how consciousness can remain integrated while operating across multiple dimensions simultaneously, a concept that would become highly influential in later philosophical and religious developments. Nestled in the fertile plains west of Athens, the sanctuary of Eleusis became the centre of the ancient world's most celebrated mystery religion, largely due to Hecate's transformative presence at the most critical moments of initiation. Her role in the Eleusinian mysteries extended far beyond simple participation. It encompassed the fundamental mechanics of spiritual transmutation. When initiates entered the Telesterion, the great hall of the mysteries, they encountered Hekate not as a distant divine figure, but as an active guide whose torches literally illuminated their passage. These torches cleared the path through a carefully orchestrated sequence of revelations that would forever alter their understanding of life, death, and the divine order. The physical structure of the Telesterion reflected the cosmic principles embodied by Hecate's role as the guide of threshold spaces. Capable of holding several thousand initiates at once, this massive rectangular hall was designed with multiple levels and chambers that recreated the geography of the mythic journey from the upper world to the underworld and back again. The central area, where the most sacred revelations took place, was surrounded by rising tiers of stone steps, allowing all participants to bear witness to the profound transformation unfolding in the flickering light. The visceral, heart-pounding reenactment of Persephone's liberation, combined with the deliberate architectural labyrinth of the sanctuary, conspired to create a sacred theatre where Hecate's torches served as the sole, flickering source of illumination, transforming the entire expanse into a realm where trembling shadows and sudden, blinding revelations danced in a hypnotic rhythm. The preparations for an initiate's encounter with Hekate began many long months before they were ever permitted to witness the mysteries in the flesh. The candidates were subjected to arduous procedures of purification, including prolonged fasting, ritual baths in freezing waters, and the obsessive study of sacred texts, all designed to prime their minds for the extraordinary experiences that lay in wait. These preparatory activities were engineered to sensitize the participants to the subtle vibrations of supernatural influences and to cultivate the spiritual receptivity required for a meaningful interaction with divine forces. This rigorous process of purification also served a vital protective function, to identify and weed out those individuals lacking the psychological stability or spiritual maturity necessary to safely endure these transformative and often terrifying rituals. During the ceremonies themselves, the role of the priest known as the Daduchos, the torchbearer who represented the masculine aspect of Hecate's light, demanded a level of dedication that spanned decades of training and required initiation into the deepest, most guarded levels of the mysteries. This hereditary office, passed down from father to son among specific, noble families of Eleusis, necessitated a mastery of complex ritual procedures, the flawless memorization of extensive sacred formulas, and the cultivation of a supernatural sensitivity needed to channel the raw power of Hekate at critical junctures of the initiation process. The Daduchos served as the goddess's representative in human form, wielding specially consecrated torches prepared through elaborate rituals designed to trap and contain Hecate's divine presence within the wood and flame. The torches utilized in the Eleusinian mysteries were far more than mere tools for visibility. They functioned as active conduits for Hecate's transformative power, serving as the focal points for the spiritual energies that guided the entire process of initiation. These sacred instruments were fashioned from the wood of pine trees, harvested only during specific phases of the moon, treated with oils and resins that had been blessed through lengthy liturgies of consecration. It was fervently believed that the flames rising from these torches possessed the agency to reveal hidden truths, to burn away the fog of illusion, and to guide souls through that terrifying but necessary process of symbolic death and rebirth. The dramatic centre of the Eleusinian initiation involved a carefully choreographed reenactment of Hecate's guiding role in retrieving Persephone from the underworld, led through the pitch-black darkness of the Telesterion by the Daduchos and a procession of torch-bearing acolytes. This solemn parade would begin in the deepest, most subterranean chamber of the hall, representing the gloomy dominion where Persephone was held captive, and would proceed slowly upward through the various levels of the building, with the gathered initiates following these moving points of light with a mounting sense of trepidation and ecstasy. The route taken by this torchlit procession recreated the mythic journey of Hekate herself, allowing the participants to experience, in their very bones, the goddess's guidance through the perilous transitions between different states of existence. The grand moment of revelation, known to the ancients as the epopteia, occurred when Hecate's torches were suddenly raised to illuminate sacred objects that had remained shrouded in darkness throughout the preceding hours of the ceremony. Ancient sources have maintained a strict, unbreakable silence regarding the precise nature of these revealed objects, yet the impact upon the witnesses is universally described as life-altering and profound. That sudden, jarring transition from absolute darkness to sacred light, facilitated by Hecate's torches, created a potent psychological experience that participants interpreted as direct, unmediated contact with divine truth. This moment of illumination was understood not merely as a symbolic representation, but as an actual participation in the cosmic process of revelation and transformation. The psychological aftershocks of Hecate's role as the torchbearer in the mysteries extended far beyond the immediate experience of initiation, creating lasting shifts in how the participants understood their relationship to the divine order. The guidance provided by the goddess through the symbolic journey from death to rebirth offered initiates a framework for comprehending their own mortality and the spiritual possibilities that existed beyond the finality of physical death. This profound understanding transformed their approach to daily life, diminishing the paralyzing fear of death while strengthening their connection to cosmic forces that transcended individual existence. The expansion of Hecate's mystery cult beyond the borders of Eleusis created a network of sanctuaries across the Greek world where similar initiation ceremonies were conducted under her guidance. The island of Aegina, situated in the Saronic Gulf between Athens and the Peloponnese, gained particular renown for a mystery cult dedicated specifically to Hekate in her roles as the saviour and the lightbringer. The mysteries of Aegina retained the essential elements of torchlit guidance and transformative revelation that characterized all authentic Hecatean initiations, yet they also developed their own unique traditions. The sacred geography of Aegina, with its myriad caves, subterranean chambers, and isolated coastal regions capable of hosting the nocturnal ceremonies central to Hecate's worship, provided the ideal conditions for the celebration of her mysteries. The island's strategic position at the crossroads of major sea lanes made it accessible to initiates from across the eastern Mediterranean, contributing to the development of a cosmopolitan community of mystics that incorporated influences from diverse cultural traditions while remaining faithful to Hecate's core principles of transformation. The priestesses serving the mysteries of Hekate at Aegina developed specialized techniques for inducing the altered states of consciousness, the deep trances necessary for a successful initiation. These techniques included the use of carefully prepared incense mixtures containing psychoactive substances derived from plants sacred to the goddess, rhythmic chants designed to synchronize the brainwaves of the participants, and controlled breathing exercises that heightened receptivity to supernatural influences. The combination of these methods with the dramatic impact of revelations illuminated by torchlight created powerful experiences that participants described as direct encounters with the divine presence. The esoteric teachings transmitted through Hecate's mystery cults encompassed far more than simple moral instructions or the promise of a blessed afterlife. These teachings included sophisticated philosophical concepts regarding the nature of reality, the structure of the cosmos, and the techniques by which human consciousness could transcend its ordinary limitations. Initiates learned that the physical world represented merely one dimension of a multi-layered reality, containing countless invisible realms populated by various categories of spiritual entities. Hecate's role as the guide between these different dimensions made her an indispensable teacher for those seeking to develop the ability to perceive and interact with the non-physical aspects of existence. The concept of spiritual purification taught in Hecate's mysteries involved far more than a simple moral cleansing or the removal of ritual pollution. The process of purification was understood as a systematic transformation of consciousness that dismantled the mental and emotional barriers preventing the direct perception of divine truth. This transformation required the dissolution of the ego structures that normally define individual identity, allowing initiates to experience themselves not as isolated entities struggling for survival in a hostile universe, but as integral parts of a greater cosmic order. One of the most advanced teachings in the mysteries of Hekate, the art of navigating liminal or threshold states, provided initiates with practical techniques for maintaining conscious awareness during transitions between different levels of reality. These techniques were essential for anyone seeking to develop proficiency in prophecy, healing, or communication with spiritual entities. Since all such practices require the ability to function effectively in the border zones between ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness, Hecate's guidance in this area was rooted in her mastery over liminal existence and her vast experience in helping souls navigate the complex transitions involving death, rebirth, and spiritual metamorphosis. The role of Hecate's priestesses in preserving and transmitting these esoteric teachings created a sophisticated educational system that operated in parallel to the more public aspects of Greek religious life. These priestesses, known as the Kleidouchoi, or key-bearers, underwent a comprehensive training that could span decades, involving progressive initiation into increasingly advanced levels of mystery knowledge. The most senior priestesses developed abilities that were considered supernatural by ordinary standards, including clairvoyance, spiritual healing, and the capacity to communicate directly with Hekate and other divine entities. The nocturnal rites conducted by these priestesses followed carefully preserved traditions handed down through generations of initiates. These ceremonies typically commenced at midnight, when Hecate's power reached its zenith intensity, and continued until the break of dawn, when the first light of the sun signaled the completion of the transformative process. The rites involved complex sequences of invocations, offerings, and ritual actions designed to create the optimal conditions for divine manifestation and spiritual change. The specialized religious practices associated with Hecate's mysteries encompassed techniques for inducing prophetic visions, methods for communing with the spirits of the dead, and procedures for creating protective amulets and magical tools. These practices required not only technical knowledge, but also the cultivation of specific spiritual qualities, such as fearlessness in the face of supernatural phenomena, an unwavering commitment to truth, and the ability to maintain mental clarity under extreme psychological pressure. The training process for these practices was intentionally arduous and potentially dangerous, as practitioners needed to develop the strength and stability required to interact safely with potent spiritual forces. The creation of sacred space for Hecate's mysteries involved elaborate procedures that transformed ordinary locations into portals for divine manifestation. These procedures began with the careful selection of suitable sites based on their natural features and their relationship to the goddess's sphere of influence. Caves, crossroads, and sea cliffs were preferred locations, as their natural characteristics resonated with Hecate's dominion over liminal spaces. Once a site was selected, it underwent an extensive process of purification and consecration that could take weeks or even months to complete. The physical preparation of mystery sites included the installation of permanent altars and the creation of subterranean chambers for the most secret rituals. The establishment of sacred groves where initiates could undergo spiritual purification before entering the greater mysteries formed the most peaceful, yet disciplined aspect of Hecate's worship. These structures and sanctuaries were designed not by random arrangement, but according to precise, ancient geometric principles believed to focus and amplify spiritual energies. The orientation of altars and ceremonial spaces followed complex astronomical calculations to ensure optimal alignment with celestial forces during the specific times when the mysteries were celebrated, as if the stones of the earth were arranged to dance in perfect harmony with the stars in the heavens. This intricate web of sanctuaries dedicated to the Lady of the Crossroads spun a gossamer thread of sacred geography that stretched across the entirety of the ancient Mediterranean world, binding diverse and distant communities together through the shared, trembling experience of her transformative rituals. These were not merely isolated outposts of faith, but pulsing nodes in a vast spiritual nervous system. Great centres of her worship thrived not only upon the rugged, stone-strewn soil of the Greek mainland, but also along the mist-shrouded mystical coastlines of Asia Minor, amid the wind-swept hills of southern Italy, within the fertile volcanic heart of Sicily, and deep into the enigmatic sun-scorched territories of North Africa. Each of these sanctuaries, while adapting the fundamental tenets of the Hecatean initiation to breathe in rhythm with their local cultural atmosphere, maintained an ironclad, umbilical connection to the ancestral traditions first established at Eleusis and the other primordial seats of power. The influence radiating from these centres of mystery transcended the simple boundaries of religious function, expanding to leave an indelible mark upon the cultural and intellectual evolution of the age. Many of the great philosophical schools that blossomed during the Hellenistic period drank deeply from the well of concepts and practices first cultivated within the shadowed halls of Hecate's mysteries. The emphasis placed by these cults on the transmutation of the soul, the systematic, fearless exploration of human consciousness, and that unique alchemical fusion of theoretical wisdom with visceral, practical experience provided the blueprint for the educational approaches that would eventually steer the course of the Western intellectual tradition. Preserving the integrity of Hecate's teachings through centuries of political firestorms and shifting cultural tides required methods of coding and transmission that were nothing short of sophisticated. The most volatile, earth-shattering verities, the aeroton, or that which cannot be spoken, were never committed to the fragility of parchment nor scratched into wax tablets. Instead, they were locked within the iron vaults of memory, preserved through rigorously structured oral traditions that demanded the initiate memorize vast oceans of material with a flawless crystalline precision. Knowledge of a less perilous nature was recorded in symbolic forms, complex ciphers that could only be unravelled by those who possessed the interpretative keys granted during the lower grades of initiation. The economic and social arteries that sustained Hecate's mystery cults birthed communities of immense influence, weaving themselves into the political and cultural tapestry of their regions. The rivers of gold and votive offerings flowing from the pilgrimages to the great centres funded ambitious architectural programs, supported legions of priests and temple staff, and allowed for the flourishing of sophisticated institutions of learning. The bonds formed between initiates, forged in the fires of shared ritual, created networks of mutual support that transcended the rigid, traditional barriers of citizenship, social caste, and ethnic bloodlines. Under the dark, starry mantle of Hekate, all were kin in a spiritual brotherhood. The transmutation of this sacred knowledge into the realm of practical magic reached its terrifying zenith in Hecate's absolute mastery over pharmakeia. This was no simple herbalism or rustic healing, but the high art of working with botanical spirits, poisons, and sorcerous compounds to fundamentally alter both physical reality and spiritual conditions. This discipline encompassed a profound, dangerous understanding of how natural substances could serve as conduits for supernatural power, acting as bridges between the material and the ethereal, becoming tools through which the will of the sorcerer could be impressed upon the world. Hecate's dominion over pharmakeia established her as the supreme divine patroness of all who sought to manipulate the fabric of reality by marrying botanical wisdom with ritual expertise. The goddess's intimate connection to pharmakeia stemmed from her essential nature as a liminal deity, a walker between worlds who understood the threshold spaces where different categories of existence bleed into one another. In the ancient mind, plants were unique, liminal beings. They existed simultaneously in multiple realms, their roots thrusting deep into the chthonic darkness of the underworld to drink from the waters of the dead, while their branches reached upward into the sky to consume the light of the heavens. Nourished by both the corpse-filled earth and the celestial sun, possessing the dual capacity to heal or to kill depending on the intent of the hand that gathered them, plants were the perfect vessels for Hecate's transformative power. The sacred flora most closely associated with Hecate's pharmakeia included species possessing potent psychoactive properties, lethal toxins, or bizarre growth patterns that whispered of a supernatural origin. The mighty oaks, with their colossal trunks and lifespans stretching across centuries, stood as living, breathing monuments to Hecate's enduring power. They provided the bark, leaves, and acorns that were foundational ingredients in rites of protection and prophecy. The oak's intimate, violent relationship with lightning linked it to the concept of sudden, blinding revelation and the tearing of the veil between worlds, making substances derived from its wood particularly effective in rituals designed to open channels of communication with non-human intelligences. Yet, it was the yew tree that held a darker, more significant place in Hecate's botanical arsenal. Known for its extreme longevity and its paradoxical nature as a symbol of both death and eternal life, the yew embodied the cyclical nature of existence over which Hekate presided. These evergreen giants, capable of living for thousands of years, and regenerating by birthing new trunks from within their own hollowed, decaying cores, were living hieroglyphs of resurrection. The toxic alkaloids coursing through the yews bark and needles could, depending on the dosage and the method of preparation, induce prophetic visions, bring about a swift and silent death, or serve as a potent ingredient in amulets designed to ward off malevolent spirits. Practitioners who dared to work with the yew had to undergo rigorous training to handle its lethal potential, without succumbing to the very energies they sought to wield. The cypress tree, with its pillar-like silhouette standing sentinel over graveyards and funeral grounds, provided another category of sacred material essential to Hecate's art. The resinous wood of the cypress, resistant to rot and decay, was viewed as the ideal substance for crafting magical tools that needed to retain their charge over long durations. The essential oil of the cypress, extracted through painstaking processes of distillation, served as a base for countless magical unguents, and was prized above all for its ability to thin the barrier between the living and the dead, facilitating conversation with the shades of the departed. Then there was aconite, known in the common tongue as wolfsbane, representing the most volatile and dangerous weapon in Hecate's pharmacological treasury. This flowering plant contained alkaloids of such savage potency that even a minute quantity could stop the heart within hours. Yet, in the hands of a master, it was the key to the locked doors of the mind. Properly prepared, it could trigger profound divinatory trances, facilitate the separation of the soul from the body for astral travel, and serve as the critical ingredient in the legendary flying ointments of the witches. The extreme peril associated with aconite ensured that it remained the province of only the most advanced adepts, its use requiring a comprehensive knowledge of antidotes and protective barriers. The preparation of magical substances from these sacred plants followed complex ritualized procedures that fused botanical science with astrological timing and ceremonial purity. It was not enough to know the chemical properties of a root or leaf. The practitioner had to understand the precise cosmic moment when the plant's spiritual potency was at its peak. The harvest typically took place during the dark of the moon, Hecate's own time, when the night sky was a void and the influence of the solar gods was at its nadir. Many herbs were gathered at the witching hour of midnight to capture the zenith of supernatural energy. The processing of these materials involved techniques that were as much alchemy as they were botany, designed to concentrate and purify the magical essence, while neutralizing unwanted physical side effects. Distillation, fermentation, grinding and extraction were performed in spaces that had been ritualistically cleansed, accompanied by continuous rhythmic incantations invoking Hekate to bless the work. The resulting oils, powders, tinctures, and compounds were stored in vessels consecrated to the goddess, marked with her sigils and hidden away in dark places where the uninitiated eyes could not desecrate them. The legendary sorceresses of Greek literature provided archetypal examples of how Hecate's pharmakeia could be wielded by mortal hands. Medea of Colchis, granddaughter of the sun god Helios, and niece to the enchantress Circe, represented the absolute apex of sorceress potential. Her abilities, which included the power to restore lost youth, grant invincibility in battle, or induce sudden, agonizing death, demonstrated the godlike power available to those who fully embraced Hecate's dark tutelage. Medea's most famous feats, aiding Jason in his quest for the Golden Fleece and subsequently wreaking havoc upon those who betrayed her, displayed the full spectrum of Hecate's art. Her preparation of the protective ointment that allowed Jason to withstand the fire-breathing bulls required a profound knowledge of heat-resistant botanical compounds, fused with rituals of invulnerability. The sleeping potion she brewed to incapacitate the sleepless dragon guarding the fleece proved her mastery over the minds of supernatural beasts. Her rejuvenation of Jason's father, Aeson, achieved through a gruesome yet miraculous ritual involving the replacement of his old blood with a magical decoction, showcased her command over the very forces of life and entropy. Yet, the tragic chapters of Medea's saga, specifically her use of poisoned gifts to murder her romantic rival, and the unthinkable sacrifice of her own children to punish Jason's infidelity, revealed the terrifying moral complexities surrounding the practice of high magic. These events served as a grim warning that the same knowledge used to heal and protect could, when wielded by a mind fractured by grief and rage, become an instrument of apocalyptic vengeance. Circe, the divine sorceress who ruled the island of Aea, embodied a different yet equally potent aspect of Hecate's pharmakeia. Her signature ability to transform visitors into animals through the administration of drugged potions represented the ultimate application of botanical magic, shape-shifting. These were not mere illusions or tricks of the light, but actual biological transmutations of the physical form, requiring a deep intrinsic understanding of the relationship between the consciousness and the flesh. Circe's magic demonstrated that under the gaze of Hekate, form itself is fluid, and reality is merely clay waiting to be reshaped by the will of the wise. The island sanctuary of Aya, where Circe practiced her dark and enchanting arts, offered a pristine, hermetic environment, perfectly isolated from the mundane world for the cultivation and preparation of magical flora. This secluded nature of the island ensured that the sorceress goddess's workings remain uncorrupted, far removed from the prying eyes or clumsy interferences of ordinary mortals, while its strategic position at the nexus of the great sea lanes kept her in constant, if perilous, contact with travellers from the four corners of the known world. This rare convergence of absolute solitude and inevitable accessibility created the optimal conditions for magical research and development, allowing Circe to experiment with novel techniques and potent botanical strains without ever severing her connection to the wider magical community that whispered her name in fear and reverence. The tension-filled relationship between Circe and Odysseus, as immortalized in the epic verses of Homer's Odyssey, illuminated the vital principles governing the interaction between practitioners of high magic and those shielded by powerful spiritual defenses. The immunity Odysseus gained against Circe's transformative elixirs, achieved through the consumption of the sacred moly herb presented to him by Hermes, served as a definitive proof that Hecate's pharmakeia, though extraordinarily potent, was not irresistible when confronted with appropriate countermeasures administered by one possessing divine protection. The magical practices associated with the worship of Hekate were not merely confined to the preparation and utilization of plant-based substances, but expanded to encompass a vast array of techniques designed to manipulate supernatural forces directly. Binding spells, intended to compel specific actions or inhibit unwanted behaviors, represented one of the most frequently requested fields of magical expertise in the ancient world. These spells typically involved the creation of physical objects that symbolically represented the target and the desired outcome, combined with verbal formulas that invoke the raw power of Hekate to impose the practitioner's will upon reality. The construction of binding tablets, thin sheets of beaten lead inscribed with curses or compulsions and deposited in locations intrinsically linked to Hecate's power, became a widespread practice across the entire Mediterranean basin. Known as defixia, these tablets contain texts prepared with meticulous care, stating the desired result in precise, quasi-legalistic language and calling upon Hecate's authority to ensure absolute obedience. The deliberate selection of lead for these tablets stemmed from the metal's heavy, cold and melancholic association with the planet Saturn, as well as its renowned capacity to trap, hold and imprison the spiritual forces within its dense atomic structure. The act of depositing these tablets at crossroads, within fresh graves, or inside subterranean chambers placed them directly within Hecate's sphere of influence. For these locations were understood as the thin places, the apertures where the veil between worlds was most permeable. Love magic represented another major category of magical application, falling under Hecate's vast patronage, where practitioners sought her aid to attract desired partners, maintain the flames of romantic relationships, or sever unwanted attachments that had grown toxic. These spells typically blended the use of aphrodisiac herbs with ritual procedures designed to forge sympathetic bonds between the practitioner and their target. The goddess's authority over emotional transformation and her deep primordial understanding of the complex psychological forces driving human behavior made her the ideal patroness for those seeking to influence the volatile tides of romance. The preparation of love philters required a comprehensive knowledge of plants capable of affecting mood, perception, and physical attraction, combined with ritual techniques capable of establishing the energetic connections necessary for the magic to take root. However, practitioners were required to possess a profound understanding of the ethical implications of their work. Since love magic raised complex questions regarding free will, consent, and the violation of the soul's sovereignty, the most skilled and wise adepts focused their spells on revealing existing harmonies rather than attempting to manufacture an artificial attraction. They chose to work within the natural flow of emotional energy, rather than attempting to override it entirely. Protective wards formed another vital category of magical work, demonstrating Hecate's deep concern for the well-being of her devotees. These spells aimed to create insurmountable barriers against harmful influences, whether they originated from malevolent spirits, hostile sorcery, or dangerous physical circumstances. The creation of protective amulets involved the combination of appropriate materials, such as iron to deflect negative energy or silver to enhance psychic sensitivity, with verbal formulas that defined the specific boundaries of the sought-after protection. The consecration of homes and other edifices with protective rituals created permanent security measures that would continue to function without requiring the constant maintenance of the practitioner. These procedures typically encompassed the burial or placement of protective objects at key points along the property's perimeter, the anointing of door frames and windows with magical oils, and the performance of invocations inviting Hecate's enduring guardianship. The efficacy of these wards depended largely on the skill of the practitioner and the sincerity of their relationship with the goddess, for protective magic required a genuine spiritual connection rather than mere technical expertise. The ancient magical papyri, those vast collections of spell texts and ritual instructions, preserved in the arid sands of Egyptian burial grounds, offer comprehensive documentation of the practical techniques employed by practitioners working under Hecate's patronage. These texts reveal the sophisticated level of magical knowledge developed during the Hellenistic period, containing detailed instructions for complex rituals that fused Greek magical traditions with influences flowing from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other ancient cultural wellsprings. The papyri illustrate how the worship of Hekate spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, adapting to local conditions while preserving its fundamental characteristics. The ritual procedures described in these magical texts required considerable preparation and expertise to be performed safely and effectively. Many spells mandated periods of rigorous fasting, purification baths, and the preparation of intricate ritual tools that had to be constructed according to exacting specifications. The timing of magical operations followed complex astrological calculations that took into account the positions of the wandering planets, the phase of the moon, and other celestial factors believed to influence the success of the work. The invocations used in these rituals reveal the intimate relationship practitioners sought to establish with Hekate. They addressed her by a myriad of epithets acknowledging the different facets of her divine nature. These prayers combined a specific request for aid with a deep expression of devotion and a recognition of her supreme authority over the magical arts. The language employed in these invocations was often highly poetic and emotionally charged, reflecting the intense spiritual connection required for a successful magical application. The social networks that developed around Hecate's magical practices created communities of practitioners who shared knowledge, collaborated on complex projects, and provided mutual support during times of difficulty. These networks operated largely in secrecy due to the skeptical and often hostile attitude mainstream society displayed toward magical practices, yet they maintained sophisticated systems for training new practitioners and preserving traditional lore. The most successful mages often served as informal community leaders, providing healing, protection, and guidance to their neighbours while maintaining their connections to the broader magical tradition. The economic aspects of magical practice created opportunities for skilled practitioners to earn a livelihood by offering their services. Although this commercialization carried the risk of fraud and exploitation, genuine practitioners had to balance their spiritual obligations with practical concerns regarding compensation. Clients, in turn, were forced to distinguish between authentic magical expertise and the spurious claims of charlatans seeking to profit from desperation and ignorance. The ascension of Zeus to the pinnacle of divine authority marked a watershed moment in cosmic history, fundamentally altering the power structures that governed the universe. When the Titanomachy, that great war of the gods, concluded with the decisive victory of the Olympian forces, most of the ancient Titans found themselves stripped of their domains and cast into the gloom of Tartarus, their once immense authority reduced to a mere memory. Yet, among this pantheon of defeated primordial powers, Hekate alone not only retained her original privileges, but received a clear confirmation from Zeus himself regarding the expansion of her divine jurisdiction. This extraordinary arrangement stemmed from strategic foresight, cosmic necessity, and the unique nature of Hecate's authority, which transcended traditional categories of divine power. Hesiod's narrative in the Theogony offers the most detailed depiction of this astonishing preservation of Titanic authority, recounting how Zeus honoured her above all others by ratifying her ancient privileges and granting her unprecedented power over the earth, the sea, and the sky. This triple dominion represented something entirely new in the cosmic order, for no other deity possessed such comprehensive jurisdiction across all realms of existence. The decision of Zeus to grant Hekate this extraordinary status reflected an admission that the effective governance of the universe required a deity capable of overseeing the complex interactions between different cosmic spheres and facilitating the transitions necessary to maintain the balance of reality. The practical implications of this arrangement became evident in the daily administration of divine affairs, where Hecate's unique position allowed her to serve as an intermediary between Zeus and the various categories of supernatural beings inhabiting different levels of reality. Her authority over borders and transitions made her essential for managing the flow of communication and resources between the Olympian realm, the mortal world, and the subterranean domains ruled by Hades. This mediating function required diplomatic skills and supernatural abilities possessed by few other gods, rendering her an indispensable component of the new cosmic order. The respect Zeus accorded to Hecate's ancient privileges went beyond simple political calculation, encompassing a genuine appreciation for her unique talents and her potential contributions to the Olympian administration. Unlike many of the younger gods who acquired their positions through conquest or inheritance, Hekate had earned her authority through proven competence in managing complex supernatural phenomena. Her history of successful intervention in cosmic crises, combined with her ability to maintain stability during periods of transition, made her a valuable ally whose loyalty was worth securing through generous treatment. The goddess's relationship with Zeus developed along lines fundamentally different from his interactions with other female deities. Rather than pursuing her with romantic desire, or attempting to subordinate her authority to his own, Zeus treated Hekate as a sovereign colleague whose functions were vital to his own reign. She was far more than a mere subject kneeling before the throne of the Thunderer. Hekate stood as a revered colleague whose unique mastery complemented the raw imperial might of the King of the Heavens himself. This professional communion was forged upon a bedrock of profound mutual acknowledgement, a recognition of each other's boundless strengths and necessary limitations. While Zeus held the ultimate supremacy over universal politics and the steering of the cosmos, he possessed the humility to concede that certain shadowed labyrinthine aspects of cosmic administration required the specialized eldritch knowledge that only Hekate possessed. This collaborative aspect of their relationship became particularly pronounced during those moments of great cosmic crisis, when the architecture of reality trembled and required a coordinated response from multiple seats of divine authority. When natural cataclysms threatened to shatter the delicate equilibrium between the different realms of existence, Zeus would turn to Hekate, seeking her counsel to determine the precise interventions required to restore stability. Her uncanny ability to perceive the hidden spiritual machinations festering beneath physical phenomena rendered her advice priceless in situations where traditional displays of thunder and lightning proved insufficient. These high consultations established ancient precedents for divine cooperation, shaping the administrative procedures of Olympus for centuries to come. The bond between Hekate and Artemis represented one of the most significant and enduring partnerships within the Olympian pantheon, creating an unshakable alliance that fused their complementary authorities over the natural world and the diverse facets of the feminine divine. Both goddesses shared deep, intrinsic tethers to the moon, to the mysterious activities of the night, and to the fierce protection of young women during the critical transitions of their lives. Yet their specific domains and methods of operation were distinct enough to avoid the friction of direct competition, while remaining sufficiently aligned to allow for extensive collaboration in areas of mutual interest. The lunar connection shared by both deities formed the natural foundation for their partnership. Although their relationships with lunar phenomena operated through different mechanisms and served different ends, Artemis embodied the bright, visible aspects of the moon's influence, the silver light that governs fertility, the rhythms of the hunting seasons, and the precise timing of agricultural endeavours. Her lunar authority was primarily concerned with the practical applications of celestial timing, and the coordination of earthly activities with cosmic rhythms. In stark contrast, Hecate's connection to the moon focused on the hidden, transformative, and occult aspects of the satellite. She ruled over the dark moon, that time when the orb is invisible to the eyes of the earth, a period when the veil between worlds grows thin and porous, and when magical activities reach their zenith of potency. Her lunar dominion encompassed the psychological and spiritual impacts of the moon's phases, including their sway over dreams, visions, and altered states of consciousness. This division of lunar responsibilities allowed both goddesses to wield their powers without conflict, creating opportunities for profound cooperation when their authorities overlapped. The protection of maidens during the fragile thresholds of their lives represented another arena where the powers of Artemis and Hekate intersected in productive harmony. Artemis focused primarily on the physical aspects of female development, guarding the transition from childhood to adolescence and shielding young women from early sexual predation or unwanted advances. Her role emphasized the preservation of innocence and the maintenance of proper boundaries between different life stages. Hecate's involvement in feminine transitions, however, operated on a far deeper psychological and spiritual level, addressing the internal alchemies that accompany external physical changes. She guided young women through the complex emotional and mental adjustments required for a successful adaptation to adult responsibilities, helping them cultivate the inner strength and wisdom necessary to navigate the treacherous waters of mature life. Her protection extended beyond mere physical safety to encompass spiritual and psychological well-being during those vulnerable periods of personal metamorphosis. The hunting activities central to Artemis's identity created additional opportunities for collaboration with Hekate, particularly in scenarios involving supernatural quarries or expeditions that crossed into otherworldly territories. Artemis's peerless expertise in tracking and slaying physical beasts was perfectly complemented by Hecate's intimate knowledge of supernatural creatures, and her ability to navigate the liminal, threshold spaces where such entities typically dwell. Their combined talents transformed them into a pair of fearsome partners capable of neutralizing monsters and supernatural threats that posed a danger to both divine and mortal communities. The relationship between Hekate and Apollo, the radiant lord of the silver bow, represented a dynamic of exquisite complexity, mirroring the eternal trembling tension between light and darkness, between revelation and mystery, between rational knowledge and intuitive wisdom. These opposing forces were not necessarily hostile. Rather, they represented complementary aspects of a greater cosmic balance that required both elements for proper functioning. The interplay between Apollo and Hekate demonstrated how seemingly contradictory divine principles could coexist and even strengthen one another when properly understood and managed. Apollo's association with the brilliance of sunlight, rational thought, and clear revelation created a natural contrast with Hecate's dominion over the dark, intuitive knowledge and hidden mysteries. His oracle at Delphi provided direct, albeit often cryptic, answers to specific inquiries through the inspired manic utterances of the Pythia. Hecate's methods of prophecy, however, relied on the interpretation of subtle signs, omens, and symbols, a practice requiring extensive training and a refined spiritual sensitivity to decode correctly. These divergent approaches to prophetic knowledge served different categories of seekers and addressed different types of questions, creating a comprehensive system of divine guidance capable of meeting the myriad needs of humanity. The musical and poetic activities central to Apollo's identity found intriguing parallels in the spoken formulas and incantations that formed the bedrock of Hecate's magical practices. Both deities understood the power of properly constructed language to influence reality and manifest desired outcomes, yet they applied this understanding in different contexts and for different ends. Apollo's music and poetry were designed to elevate human consciousness toward divine truth, to educate, and to inspire. Hecate's verbal formulas, by contrast, were crafted to manipulate supernatural forces and achieve specific practical results in the material world. The healing abilities possessed by both gods operated through different mechanisms and addressed different varieties of affliction. Apollo's curative powers worked primarily through the restoration of natural balance and the removal of physical or spiritual impurities that disrupted normal functioning. His methods emphasized purification, harmony, and the re-establishment of proper relationships between the different aspects of a patient's being. Hecate's approach to healing, conversely, often involved working with the root causes of illness existing in the spiritual or psychological realms. Her treatments required the patient to undergo transformative experiences that addressed the source of their troubles rather than merely alleviating the symptoms. This approach could be more arduous and potentially more perilous than Apollo's methods, but it often produced healing results that were more permanent and comprehensive. The roles played by both deities in divine politics illustrated their importance in maintaining the stability and effectiveness of the Olympian government. Apollo's position, as one of Zeus's most trusted advisors, granted him significant influence over major policy decisions and access to the highest levels of divine authority. His rational approach to problem-solving and his ability to provide clear analyses of complex situations made him invaluable in scenarios requiring careful planning and strategic thought. Hecate's political influence operated through different channels, but was equally significant in terms of its impact on divine administration. Her role as a mediator between different generations of gods and her unique ability to maintain relationships with various categories of supernatural beings made her essential for implementing policies that required the cooperation of diverse divine constituencies. Her diplomatic skills and her reputation for justice and reliability allowed her to resolve conflicts and broker agreements that might otherwise have disrupted the cosmic order. The independence maintained by both deities within the Olympian system reflected their secure positions and their valuable contributions to divine governance. Neither Apollo nor Hekate acted merely as subordinate enforcers of Zeus's will. Instead, they operated as autonomous agents whose expertise and judgment were respected by the supreme god. This independence allowed them to develop approaches unique to their own domains, while contributing to the overall efficacy of the Olympian administration. Specific myths involving the interactions between Hekate and various Olympian gods reveal the practical applications of her unique position and capabilities within the divine community. Her assistance to heroes undertaking perilous quests demonstrated her willingness to support mortal endeavours that served greater cosmic purposes, even when such support required risk-taking or the expenditure of considerable divine energy. These interventions were not acts of random favoritism, but strategic decisions based on her understanding of how individual actions could influence broader patterns of cosmic evolution. Her guidance provided to heroes like Theseus, as he navigated the labyrinth, showcased her expertise in helping mortals overcome complex supernatural challenges, requiring both physical courage and spiritual wisdom. Her ability to provide the necessary knowledge and tools for success in seemingly impossible situations made her a prized ally for heroes whose achievements would benefit both divine and mortal communities. The famous thread that guided Theseus through the twisting stone intestines of the labyrinth was far more than a simple physical aid. It was a tangible manifestation of Hecate's wisdom and protection, a symbolic umbilical cord connecting the hero to the divine sight that sees through all confusion. Her participation in the quest for the Golden Fleece, mediated through her relationship with Medea, demonstrated how her influence could operate indirectly through mortal practitioners who had mastered her mysteries. Rather than intervening directly in the events surrounding Jason's expedition, she worked through her devoted follower to ensure the mission's success while imparting critical lessons regarding the proper use of magical power and the dire consequences of betraying divine trust. Her assistance during various divine disputes revealed her role as a mediator and troubleshooter, whose unique perspective often allowed her to identify solutions that escaped the notice of other gods. Her ability to view situations from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, combined with her understanding of long-term cosmic development, granted her a clarity of vision that was unparalleled. Hecate's capacity to foresee the rippling consequences of different courses of action made her counsel an invaluable treasure during those complex conflicts where competing claims clashed or where interests were hopelessly slightly tangled. Her function in maintaining cosmic order extended far beyond the management of momentary crises, encompassing the ongoing oversight of the boundaries and transitions essential for universal stability. The unerring movements of the celestial bodies, the seasonal shifts that govern agricultural cycles, and the eternal patterns of life, death, and rebirth that sustain all existence, all these processes required the perpetual vigilance of a deity who profoundly understood the delicate balance of the forces involved. Hecate's unwavering watchfulness in monitoring these cosmic functions ensured that disruptions were detected and corrected before they could metastasize into greater problems, preventing a cascade of catastrophes that might otherwise threaten the stability of the entire universe. The maternal tenderness woven into the eldritch fabric of Hecate's divine nature manifests most potently in her ancient role as Kurotrophos, the divine child nurturer. Through this sacred aspect, her protective influence was cast like an impenetrable shield over the young during their most vulnerable stages of development. This function transcended the simple, passive act of guarding. It involved an active, dynamic participation in the complex physical, emotional, and spiritual maturation processes that transform a helpless infant into a capable adult. The ancient Greek communities understood with a visceral clarity that the successful raising of a child required supernatural assistance, for the path from the cradle to maturity was fraught with countless perils that could permanently damage or extinguish a young life's potential. The goddess's protective oversight began at the very moment of birth, invoked with the first ragged breath of the newborn to ensure a safe delivery and a healthy beginning. Midwives, those practical guardians of the birthing bed across the Greek world, maintained consecrated shrines to Hekate within their homes, offering daily prayers and regular sacrifices to secure her blessing upon their delicate work. These practitioners understood deeply that childbirth was one of the most critical threshold experiences in the human narrative, a dangerous crossing that required the assistance of a deity who specialized in managing the perilous transition between worlds. The torches associated with Hecate's iconography took on a profound, almost metaphysical significance within the context of birth. It was believed that their spiritual light guided new souls safely from the ethereal realm into the physical vessel of the body. The specific rituals performed during labour to summon Hecate's protection were elaborate and steeped in magical tradition, including the placement of iron objects around the birthing chamber to create a barrier against malevolent spirits, the burning of specific incense mixtures designed to attract her beneficial influence, and the recitation of ancient protective formulas passed down through generations of midwives. These procedures were not merely superstitious habits, but represented a sophisticated understanding of the spiritual dynamics involved in the birthing process and the practical methods required to ensure the most favourable outcomes. The naming ceremonies held for newborns included special invocations demanding Hecate's continued protection throughout the child's growth. Under the velvet cover of the dark moon following a birth, parents would carry offerings of honey, eggs, and specially baked cakes to the altars at the crossroads, formally entrusting their infant to the goddess's guardianship. These ceremonies established spiritual bonds intended to last a lifetime, providing ongoing defense against various dangers and ensuring access to Hecate's guidance at critical decision points. The educational aspects of Hecate's child-rearing function involved the transmission of essential life skills and spiritual wisdom necessary for successful adult functioning. This education occurred not through formal schooling, but through the gradual unfolding of intuitive understanding and practical capabilities that emerged naturally under her protective influence. Children who received Hecate's blessing typically displayed an enhanced sensitivity to spiritual phenomena, an improved ability to navigate social complexities, and a robust resilience when facing life's inevitable hardships. The protection of adolescents during their transition to adult status represented one of Hecate's most vital responsibilities, for this developmental phase harboured a myriad of physical, emotional and social changes that could easily go awry without proper guidance. The goddess's oversight during adolescence focused particularly on helping youth develop appropriate relationships with authority figures, learning to manage their surging sexual energies responsibly, and acquiring the practical skills necessary for economic independence and contribution to the community. Initiation rites, marking the formal passage from childhood to adult status across the Greek world, included specific elements designed to invoke Hecate's blessing upon this critical life change. These ceremonies typically took place at crossroads or other liminal spaces associated with her power, involving the symbolic death of the child self and a rebirth as an adult, accompanied by offerings acknowledging her role in facilitating this profound transformation. Participants underwent rigorous purification procedures, received instructions regarding adult responsibilities, and made formal vows to honour the goddess throughout their mature lives. The gender-specific aspects of these initiation rites reflected the ancient understanding of the distinct challenges and opportunities awaiting young men and women in adult society. Male initiation rites emphasized the development of courage, leadership abilities, and the capacity to protect family and community members. Female initiations, conversely, focused on the cultivation of wisdom, nurturing skills, and the spiritual sensitivity required to manage household religious obligations and raise the next generation of children. The protective functions Hekate exercised over vulnerable populations extended beyond children and adolescents to encompass all individuals who found themselves in situations of unusual danger or uncertainty. Travellers venturing bravely into unfamiliar territories sought her shield against the bandits, wild beasts and supernatural threats that lurked on perilous journeys. Merchants conducting business in foreign markets relied on her oversight to prevent fraud, ensure fair trade, and protect their goods from theft or damage. Women living without the shield of male protection, whether through widowhood, divorce, or other circumstances, found a special fierce solicitude in Hekate's protective influence. Since ancient Greek society provided limited legal and social protections for such women, divine guardianship was essential for their survival and well-being. The goddess's protection of vulnerable women included assistance in finding appropriate employment, defense against sexual exploitation, and guidance in navigating the complex legal and social challenges they faced. Slaves and other marginalized populations occupying the lowest tiers of Greek society also fell under Hecate's protective care, as their vulnerable status made them natural objects of divine concern for a deity who championed those lacking traditional sources of protection. Her assistance to these populations typically involved providing opportunities for the improvement of their conditions, protection against extreme abuse, and the offering of spiritual solace during times of profound hardship. The transition from Hecate's role as a personal guardian to her function as a city defender reveals the scalable nature of her divine authority, which operated as effectively at the community level as it did for the individual. As Epipagidia, the goddess who watches from the towers, she extended her protective gaze over entire urban populations, defending communities against external threats, while maintaining internal order and prosperity. This function required constant vigilance and the ability to coordinate responses to a wide variety of dangers that could threaten civic well-being. The physical manifestations of Hecate's urban protection included the strategic placement of her statues and temples at critical points throughout the city. The city gates received particular attention, featuring elaborate Hecateans positioned to observe all traffic entering and leaving the community. These installations served both as a deterrent to potential threats and as focal points for communal religious activities that maintained the goddess's favourable disposition toward the city and its inhabitants. The defence systems involving Hecate's protection went beyond simple physical barriers to encompass sophisticated spiritual security nets capable of detecting and repelling various forms of supernatural attack. Enemy sorcerers attempting to curse a city, or plague spirits seeking to spread disease would encounter these protective webs and find their malice reflected back upon themselves. The maintenance of these spiritual defences required ongoing cooperation between civil authorities and religious specialists who understood the technical requirements for keeping such systems effective. The military applications of Hecate's protective power became particularly pronounced during times of war, when entire armies would seek her blessing before marching into battle. Generals understood that victory required not only superior tactics and equipment, but also divine favour that could provide vital advantages at critical moments. The goddess's ability to confuse enemy forces, conceal the movements of friendly troops, and provide accurate intelligence regarding the opposition's plans made her an invaluable military ally. Siege warfare, a common feature of ancient Greek conflict, created specific opportunities to invoke Hecate's aid, as these prolonged engagements often involved psychological and physical elements that fell squarely within her sphere of influence. Cities under siege would organise elaborate ceremonies imploring her intervention to break the enemy encirclement, while attacking forces might seek her assistance to demoralise the defenders or create opportunities for a successful assault. Epidemics of plague and disease, which periodically devastated ancient communities, represented another category of threat requiring Hecate's protective intervention. Her ability to purify contaminated spaces and provide spiritual healing for affected populations made her an essential resource during public health crises. The goddess's knowledge of medicinal plants and purification procedures allowed her to guide community leaders in implementing effective responses to outbreaks. The economic dimensions of Hecate's city protection involved the oversight of commercial activities essential for urban prosperity. Markets, harbours, and other centres of trade received her special attention, as disruptions in commercial activity could quickly lead to widespread famine and social instability. Her protection of merchants and their goods ensured reliable supplies of essential commodities, while her oversight of fair trade maintained social order. The invisible but palpable presence of Hekate in commercial dealings ensured the maintenance of trust and honesty, while her authority extended far deeper than the noise of the marketplace, reaching into the heavy silence of the courts of justice. The judicial aspects of civic protection under Hecate's patronage addressed the necessity for fair and effective legal systems that maintained social order while respecting individual rights. Courts and other legal mechanisms were frequently placed under her protection, with judges and legal officials seeking her guidance when rendering the most difficult and labyrinthine decisions. Hecate's unshakable reputation for impartial justice and her uncanny ability to unearth truths hidden in the shadows made her the ideal patron for legal proceedings, requiring the careful weighing of complex evidence. She was not merely the law, but the sharp blade of conscience and truth. Yet the protective mantle of Hekate possessed a darker, far more ominous lining, a shadow side that revealed itself with terrifying clarity when communities or individuals failed to maintain the proper, respectful equilibrium through appropriate worship and oblations. The very goddess who provided that impregnable, mighty shield against external threats could, in the blink of an eye, transform into a source of devastating calamity for those who neglected their religious duties or violated the moral standards she imposed. This dual nature reflected the profound ancient understanding that divine power is, at its core, neutral, a raw, elemental force that can manifest as a supreme blessing or a withered curse depending entirely upon how it is approached. When Hekate withdrew her protection from disrespectful individuals or communities, the process typically began with subtle, creeping signs that escalated with a slow, agonizing inevitability. If the underlying spiritual rot was not addressed, these initial warnings would metastasize into far more serious, far more destructive tribulations, personal misfortunes, inexplicable insolvencies in commerce that drained wealth like water through a sieve, sudden and violent rifts tearing through the domestic hearth, and abrupt, wasting health issues. All these could be interpreted as warning shots across the bow, signalling that the goddess's favour had been lost, and that corrective actions to restore right relationship were urgently required. The catastrophes that could befall an entire community stemming from Hecate's displeasure were far more horrifying in their scope. The rotting of harvest in the fields, the creeping miasma of pestilence, crushing military defeats, and various forms of social unravelling that threatened the survival of the entire population were counted among the consequences of her wrath. To the ancient mind, these disasters were not random accidents of fate, but the direct mathematical results of a collective failure to maintain proper religious observances or a refusal to address the moral cancers corrupting the life of the city. The rites of purification, known as catharsis, represented one of the most vital functions of Hekate within the tapestry of ancient Greek religious practice. These rituals addressed the spiritual contagion known as miasma, a pollution that could seize both individuals and entire cities in its suffocating grip. This pollution was understood not merely as a simple moral failure, but as a genuine spiritual plague, a viral contamination of the soul that could transmit from person to person and, if not cleansed with the proper rigour, would spawn increasingly severe calamities. The goddess's unparalleled expertise in the procedures of lustration made her the primary divine recourse for dealing with these perilous conditions. The sources of miasma requiring Hecate's purifying intervention included various forms of bloodshed, sexual transgressions that violated sacred laws, the breach of religious oaths, and contact with death or other spiritually hazardous phenomena. Murder was regarded as one of the most grievous forms of this pollution, for the taking of a life created a black indelible stain that could infect not only the perpetrator, but also their kin and their immediate circle. The purification rituals prescribed by the goddess for cases of homicide involved exceedingly complex procedures that could span months or even years before successful completion. The technical aspects of these rites demanded a comprehensive library of knowledge regarding the specific procedures appropriate for different categories of pollution. The stain resulting from the shedding of blood required treatments wholly different from those needed for sexual impurity, while religious transgressions demanded their own specialized esoteric approaches. The priests, priestesses, and other religious specialists who administered these rites underwent intense and arduous training to master the diagnostic procedures necessary to determine the type and extent of the spiritual pollution, as well as the specific cures required for an effective purging. The materials utilised in these ceremonies of purification included a variety of substances renowned for their cleansing properties. Brimstone to burn away spiritual impurities with its acrid smoke, the brine of the living sea for its natural washing power, and enchanted herbs specific to Hekate, whose occult properties made them potent agents of spiritual hygiene. The preparation and application of these materials required a meticulous attention to correct procedure and precise timing to ensure their efficacy in dissolving the miasma. Community purification ceremonies under Hecate's supervision addressed large-scale spiritual crises that threatened entire populations. Natural cataclysms, the shame of military routes, or the sweep of epidemics could indicate that a whole city or region had become polluted and stood in desperate need of comprehensive lustration procedures. These community-wide ceremonies encompassed elaborate processions winding through the streets, mass sacrifices offered to the heavens and the earth, and coordinated ritual activities that could endure for days or even weeks. The psychological dimensions of purification guided by Hekate addressed the emotional and mental fallout of spiritual pollution, which could include crushing guilt, pervasive anxiety, deep melancholia, and various forms of psychological disturbance. The goddess's procedures were designed not merely to scrub away the spiritual stain, but to restore the psychological equilibrium and emotional well-being of those shattered by the polluting experience. The relationship between Hecate's benevolent and terrifying aspects created complex challenges for ancient practitioners seeking to maintain a correct standing with such a potent and potentially dangerous deity. This goddess, capable of providing fundamental protection and purification, could simultaneously rain down devastating punishments upon those who approached her improperly or failed to fulfill their religious obligations. This duality required a sophisticated understanding of her nature and a vigilant attention to correct ritual protocol. The devotional practices that evolved around Hecate's dual nature emphasized the importance of approaching her with a mixture of profound respect and healthy caution, while maintaining the confidence necessary for effective religious practice. Practitioners learned to acknowledge her gracious nature without becoming complacent, and to recognize her terrifying aspects without becoming paralyzed by dread. The balance of fear and trust that characterized successful relationships with Hekate required constant mindfulness to maintain the appropriate attitude and behavior. Excessive fear could block effective communication with the goddess, while insufficient respect could lead to perilous consequences. The most successful practitioners developed an intuitive understanding of her moods and preferences, allowing them to navigate these complex relationships with success. The management of relations with Hekate at the community level involved the development of religious institutions and practices capable of sustaining her favour while minimizing the risks associated with her more dangerous aspects. Professional priests and priestesses served as intermediaries, possessing the specialized knowledge required for safe interaction with the goddess. Community religious calendars ensured that the appropriate festivals and offerings were maintained on a regular schedule, while the ancient harbour of Iolcos buzzed with the frenetic energy of anticipation during those days when Jason gathered his crew for the most ambitious expedition of the heroic age. Among the 50 Argonauts who prepared to set sail upon the ship Argo, none could have imagined that their success would depend not merely on their individual talents, but on the divine intervention of Hekate working through her most devoted mortal practitioner. The goddess's involvement in the quest for the Golden Fleece demonstrated her willingness to intervene directly in mortal affairs when the stakes involved the cosmic balance and the proper execution of divine will. Hecate's connection to this legendary expedition operated through her relationship with Medea, the princess of Colchis, whose mastery of the goddess's mysteries elevated her to unprecedented levels of magical capability. Medea's tutelage in the arts of Hekate had begun in her childhood under the guidance of her aunt, the sorceress Circe. However, her true initiation occurred through direct communication with the goddess herself, during nocturnal rituals conducted at the crossroads outside the city of Colchis. These encounters transformed Medea from a merely skilled sorceress into a living vessel for Hecate's power, an entity capable of channeling divine energy to accomplish feats that seemed impossible to the uninitiated mind. The arrival of the Argonauts in Colchis created a crisis requiring careful divine management to ensure the appropriate outcome. King Aetes, despite his promise to Jason, had no intention of voluntarily surrendering the Golden Fleece and had devised deadly trials that he believed would result in the hero's certain death. The fire-breathing bulls that Jason was required to yoke were creatures of supernatural origin. Their bronzen hooves and breath that incinerated the very air made them impossible for any mortal to approach with safety. The dragon guarding the fleece itself was an immortal serpent whose vigilance had never been breached during the centuries it had been stationed as the warden of the precious artifact. Hecate's intervention began with the careful orchestration of the encounter between Jason and Medea, ensuring that this meeting took place under conditions conducive to the development of the alliance necessary for the mission's success. The goddess knew that Jason's heroic qualities, however admirable, were insufficient to overcome the supernatural obstacles he would face. Only by partnering with one who had mastered her mysteries could he hope to survive the trials ahead and achieve his ultimate goal. The love that blossomed between Jason and Medea represented not merely a romantic attachment, but a deeper spiritual connection that allowed divine power to flow effectively from the goddess, through her priestess, to the hero in need of supernatural aid. This connection created a conduit through which Hekate provided the necessary knowledge and protection for Jason's success, while allowing his victory to appear as though it were achieved through his own efforts and courage. The preparation of the protective ointment that would allow Jason to survive contact with the fire-breathing bulls required Medea to call upon the most advanced techniques in Hecate's pharmacological arsenal. The essential ingredients included oils extracted from plants that grew in places where the boundaries between worlds were particularly thin, flora that had absorbed supernatural energies through long exposure to otherworldly influences. The primary component was derived from the legendary Promethean flower, said to have sprung from the ichor-soaked earth, where the eagle tore at the Titan's liver during his eternal punishment. The ritual preparation of this protective compound required Medea to work within a carefully constructed sacred space that concentrated Hecate's power while excluding potentially interfering influences. The process began at midnight, during the pitch-black phase of the moon, when the goddess's authority reached its zenith intensity, and continued through the tense enchanted hours until the first light of dawn. The ancient invocations that spilled from Medea's lips throughout this preparatory process called upon the various epithets and aspects of Hekate, demanding the specific types of protection and power required for the different stages of the grueling trial Jason would face. The application of the protective ointment involved far more than simply coating Jason's body and equipment with a physical substance. The ritual procedures Medea employed wove spiritual bastions around the hero, deflecting the supernatural inferno while preserving his natural human abilities and reflexes. This protection extended beyond mere resistance to heat. It encompassed a psychological fortification against the paralyzing terror inspired by the monstrous bulls, enhancing the physical coordination Jason would need to accomplish the complex task of yoking and controlling these supernatural beasts. The ploughing of the field with the fire-breathing bulls represented only the first stage of Jason's trial, for the dragon teeth he was required to sow would, the moment they struck the soil, sprout into armed warriors intent on killing him. The guidance provided by Hekate through Medea granted Jason the vital intelligence needed to turn this seemingly impossible situation to his own advantage. Into the seething midst of these warriors born of the soil, the strategic casting of a simple stone would incite a fratricidal chaos, causing them to turn their blades upon one another in a frenzy of confusion. Their supernatural origin, birthed from the dragon's teeth sown into the furrowed earth, rendered them paradoxically vulnerable to such a diversion. This specific strategy employed against the earthborn combatants unveiled Hecate's sophisticated, almost surgical understanding of supernatural psychology and her ability to exploit the inherent fragilities woven into the nature of beings created through sorcerous means. Despite their terrifying martial prowess and their immunity to fear, these creatures lacked the complex reasoning faculties and emotional intelligence possessed by those born of natural unions. This deficit left them defenseless against simple deceptions that would never have fooled a seasoned human adversary. The goddess's intimate knowledge of these flaws allowed her to offer Jason a solution that required not the brute force of a demigod, but the sharp clarity of mind and the courage to act with swift precision. The ultimate challenge of retrieving the Golden Fleece from its sleepless draconic warden demanded the most direct and potent application of Hecate's power, for that immortal serpent could not be vanquished by the edge of a sword, nor the strength of a shield, nor by simple trickery alone. The soporific elixir prepared by Medea for this specific purpose drew its potency from the goddess's absolute authority over the fluid boundaries between consciousness and oblivion, utilizing botanical compounds capable of sedating even supernatural entities that were immune to the pharmaceuticals of mortal apothecaries. The preparation of this draught required ingredients that could only be harvested under specific rare astronomical alignments, processed through ritual procedures that infused the mixture with the power to shatter the dragon's supernatural resistance to sleep. The actual administration of this slumber-inducing syrup involved a confrontation where Medea, acting as a living conduit for Hecate's might, faced the dragon directly while Jason lay concealed in the shadows nearby. The presence of the goddess during this high-stakes encounter manifested through various supernatural phenomena. Witnesses spoke of phantom torches that illuminated the grove yet cast no earthly shadows, and the haunting strain of otherworldly music that swelled in the air, amplifying the narcotic effects of the magical compound. Jason's successful completion of these trials and his acquisition of the Golden Fleece marked a significant triumph for Hecate's influence within the sphere of mortal affairs, demonstrating her capacity to guide worthy heroes through seemingly impossible ordeals when their achievements served the greater cosmic design. The fleece itself was far more than a mere treasure of gold and wool. It stood as a radiant symbol of the power of transformation and renewal that lay at the very heart of Hecate's divine nature. Its retrieval by Jason ensured that this potency remained accessible to future generations of heroes who might require aid in their own quests. Yet, the events that unfolded in the wake of the Colchian expedition laid bare both the immense benefits and the perilous dangers inherent in accepting Hecate's aid. For the gifts of the goddess were always accompanied by corresponding responsibilities and by potential consequences for those who dared to misuse them. Jason's eventual betrayal of Medea, his abandonment of their sacred union, constituted a violation of the spiritual bonds that had made his success possible, creating the conditions for a tragedy that would consume all involved. The vast patterns of Hecate's intervention in the heroic cycles expanded far beyond the singular instance of the Argonauts, encompassing countless other examples where heroes required supernatural guidance to fulfill their destined tasks. Her assistance typically manifested during the most critical junctures of these heroic quests, moments when traditional skills proved insufficient and only divine intercession could tip the scales toward success. These interventions were never acts of random favoritism, but represented carefully weighed decisions based on the goddess's profound understanding of cosmic necessity and divine will. The hero Theseus, navigating the labyrinth beneath the palace of Knossos where the Minotaur was imprisoned to satisfy its cannibalistic hunger, received Hecate's guidance to survive the ordeal. The labyrinth was far more than a simple architectural puzzle. It embodied magical elements that confused the senses and warped spatial relationships in a manner that rendered traditional navigation impossible. Only through supernatural aid could one hope to penetrate to the monster's lair and return to the surface with their life intact. Hecate's assistance to Theseus operated through her influence over the Princess Ariadne, who provided the hero with the thread that would ensure his safe return from the depths of the maze. This thread was no ordinary length of twine, but a specially prepared magical tool that maintained its connection to the entrance, regardless of the spatial distortions twisting within the labyrinth. The goddess's blessing upon this device guaranteed that it would remain unbroken, despite the Minotaur's attempts to sever it, providing reliable guidance even in the supernatural darkness that permeated the deepest bowels of the structure. The psychological preparation Hekate provided to heroes facing supernatural challenges went beyond a simple bolstering of courage. It encompassed fundamental alterations in perception and consciousness that allowed them to function effectively in environments where normal human senses and reasoning would falter. Heroes who received her blessing frequently reported an elevated awareness of spiritual entities, a heightened ability to distinguish between illusion and reality, and an enhanced intuitive understanding of the hidden patterns governing supernatural encounters. The protective functions Hekate exercised on behalf of these champions included both active intervention during critical moments and an ongoing guardianship that shielded them from various forms of supernatural assault. Heroes under her aegis found themselves unusually resistant to curses, immune to certain types of magical compulsions, and capable of detecting hidden dangers that might otherwise have proven fatal. While these protections were not absolute, and could be overcome by sufficiently powerful opposing forces, They provided significant advantages whenever heroes confronted supernatural adversaries or navigated regions fraught with magical peril. The arduous tests of courage and wisdom Hekate imposed upon those seeking her aid served multiple purposes, including the assessment of their worthiness for divine assistance and the cultivation of the qualities necessary for the successful completion of their missions. These trials often involve confrontations with deep-seated fears, the allure of temptations, or complex moral dilemmas that reveal the hero's true character and their commitment to the principles that justify divine intervention on their behalf. The magical transformations that feature prominently in so many heroic tales frequently involved Hecate's direct or indirect influence, for her mastery over the processes of change and metamorphosis made her the primary divine authority in matters involving the fundamental alteration of form or nature. Heroes requiring temporary or permanent transformation to achieve their goals typically needed her blessing to ensure that the changes would be beneficial rather than destructive to their essence. The guidance Hekate provided to heroes as they traversed those dangerous liminal spaces, the threshold territories where the laws of physical reality dissolve, involved far more than simple instructions or protective escort. It offered comprehensive support for navigating environments where the ordinary rules of existence did not apply. These realms, which included various supernatural dimensions, enchanted regions, and the borderlands between different states of being, required specialized knowledge and capabilities possessed by few mortals without divine aid. The supernatural obstacles encountered by heroes during their quests frequently involved creatures, magical barriers, or environmental hazards that could only be overcome through the application of specific knowledge or techniques held by Hekate. Her guidance in these situations typically involved providing the hero with the intelligence necessary to exploit weaknesses in their adversaries, or to turn environmental factors to their own advantage. The divine justice Hekate administered through her involvement in heroic narratives operated according to principles emphasizing the maintenance of cosmic balance and the necessity for actions to bear appropriate consequences. Heroes who honored their obligations to the gods and conducted themselves according to proper moral standards could expect her support, while those who violated divine law or betrayed sacred trusts found themselves subject to her wrath. The long-term consequences of receiving Hecate's aid in heroic endeavors extended beyond the immediate success or failure of specific missions, encompassing ongoing relationships between the goddess and the heroes she assisted. These relationships often endured throughout the hero's lifetime, providing them with continued access to supernatural guidance and protection, while imposing corresponding obligations for proper conduct and continued service to divine purposes. The impact of Hecate's heroic interventions on subsequent generations created enduring legacies that shaped the development of heroic traditions and the understanding of the proper relationship between mortals and the divine realm. The examples set by heroes who successfully sought and utilized her aid provided models for future generations, while the cautionary tales of those who misused her gifts served as stark warnings regarding the dangers inherent in supernatural power. The integration of Hecate's heroic interventions into the vast tapestry of Greek mythology revealed the fundamental role divine guidance played in the accomplishment of great deeds and the maintenance of cosmic order. Her willingness to assist worthy heroes, combined with her punishment of those who transgressed divine law, established her as one of the most vital figures in the ancient moral framework. This divine guidance, which steered the conduct of heroes and determined the ultimate success or tragic failure of those legendary quests, fundamentally shaped Hecate's standing in the ancient world. The profound transformation of Greek religious practices during the Archaic period witnessed Hecate's evolution from a relatively minor Titanic deity into one of the most widely revered and invoked goddesses across the entire Mediterranean world. This astonishing expansion of her cult reflected both the innate adaptability of her divine nature and the increasing complexity of ancient societies, which found themselves in ever greater need of her specialized guidance through the multiplying thresholds and transitions of civilized life. Archaeological evidence unearthed from sites across the Greek mainland, from the windswept islands of the Aegean, and from distant colonial settlements demonstrates how devotion to Hekate grew consistently in parallel with the development of the great urban centers, trade networks, and cultural institutions that defined classical civilization. The earliest, trembling manifestations of Hecate's worship were not born amidst the splendor of marble columns or within the gold-laden treasuries of the state. but rather in the humble, shadowed solitude of the countryside, at those modest crossroads shrines that served the immediate visceral needs of local communities. Yet, as the wheel of time turned toward the 6th century before the Common Era, the rising power of the great city-states began to elevate these rustic devotions into something far more grandiose. The sprawling urban centres, seeking to harness the Titaness's protective might, commenced the construction of intricate and magnificent temple complexes dedicated to her manifold aspects and functions. Among these architectural marvels, the sanctuary at Aegina, renowned throughout the entirety of the ancient world for its profound mystery initiations, stood as the supreme exemplar. It established the architectural and ritual precedents that would influence the design of sacred spaces dedicated to Hekate across a vast geography, stretching from the volcanic soil of Sicily to the misty distant shores of the Black Sea. These structures were not mere buildings. They were stone manifestations of the goddess's own liminal nature. They incorporated specific design elements intended to mirror her dominion over the threshold. Multiple entrances facing the different cardinal directions to welcome the winds of fate, winding subterranean corridors connecting to natural caverns or artificial hypergea representing the womb of the underworld, and elevated platforms granting a panoptical view of the surrounding crossroads and boundaries. Around these great centres of cultic activity, the institution of the priesthood blossomed into a sophisticated hierarchy of religious specialists, a dedicated caste who maintained the diverse facets of Hecate's worship and coordinated their activities to offer comprehensive spiritual services to their communities. The highest-ranking priestesses, known as the Clé du Choi, or the Key-bearers, were not merely appointed, they were forged. They underwent a rigorous regimen of training that spanned scores of years, involving the mastery of complex ritual procedures, the flawless memorization of extensive sacred formulas and genealogies, and the cultivation of those rare, supernatural faculties that permitted direct communion with the goddess. These senior practitioners served as the pillars of their societies, acting as oracles, healers, and spiritual guides whose authority extended far beyond the physical walls of their temple precincts. The expansion of Hecate's worship throughout the classical period coincided with an era of increasing contact between the diverse cultural groups of the Mediterranean basin, creating fertile ground for religious syncretism, the alchemical blending of faiths that enriched her cult while preserving its essential eldritch core. As Greek colonists drove their ships onto the shores of southern Italy and Sicily, establishing new lives in strange lands, they encountered local religious traditions honouring goddesses who possessed attributes remarkably similar to their own mistress of the night. This convergence led to the development of hybrid forms of worship that fused Hellenic ritual practices with indigenous beliefs. Through this syncretic process, Diana, originally a Latin goddess of the hunt and the untamed wilds, gradually absorbed many of Hecate's darker, more mystical characteristics, until, in many contexts, the two became virtually indistinguishable. This identification between Hekate and Diana proved particularly potent in Roman religious practice, where the unified goddess assumed the heavy responsibility of guarding the city's boundaries, overseeing the spiritual well-being of the household, and providing guidance during the critical transitions of mortal life. Roman families would maintain small, intimate shrines dedicated to Diana Hekate within the privacy of their homes, offering daily prayers and periodic sacrifices to secure her enduring protection and favour. These domestic practices forged a deep, intergenerational intimacy between the goddess and individual families, establishing traditions of hereditary devotion that would survive through centuries of political upheaval and cultural metamorphosis. In the Hellenistic period, the integration of Egyptian religious elements into Hecate's cult created even more complex and syncretic formations, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of the kingdoms established by the successors of Alexander. Isis, the great Egyptian goddess whose authority encompassed magic, healing, and the protection of the vulnerable, shared so many attributes with Hekate that their fusion created a synthesis of immense natural and spiritual power. The resulting Isis-Hekate synthesis incorporated Egyptian ritual techniques, including elaborate purification procedures and the use of specific magical formulas inscribed in hieroglyphic script. While retaining the Greek emphasis on crossroads worship and mystery initiation, the magical papyri discovered in Egyptian burial grounds offer comprehensive documentation of how this syncretic process functioned in practice. The spells and invocations contained within these crumbling scrolls address Hekate with epithets drawn from multiple traditions, seamlessly blending Greek, Egyptian, and other cultural elements into a singular, potent invocation. These texts reveal the sophisticated level of theological synthesis achieved by ancient practitioners who understood that different cultural expressions of divine power could be unified without losing their essential efficacy. The goddess addressed in these papyri, Hekate Isis, the Lady of Magic, the Queen of the Crossroads, the Mistress of the Sacred Serpents, represents a truly integrated divine figure rather than a simple combination of separate deities. The philosophical developments of the Hellenistic age provided new intellectual contexts for understanding Hecate's cosmic significance, extending far beyond her traditional roles in popular religion. The Orphic hymns, composed in the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, presented her as a fundamental cosmic principle, whose authority encompassed the creation, preservation, and ultimate dissolution of all existence. These profound texts identified her as the anima mundi, the soul of the world, a consciousness permeating all levels of reality, her will determining the unfolding patterns of cosmic development. This philosophical interpretation elevated Hekate from the status of a powerful but local deity to a universal principle whose influence extended throughout the entire cosmos. The Orphic tradition's emphasis on the soul's journey through multiple incarnations gave special significance to Hecate's function as a psychopompos, the guide of souls, steering the spirit through the complex transitions between different states of being. Since the Orphics understood death as merely one of many transitions in the soul's eternal development, Hecate's traditional role as the guardian of thresholds and the guide of liminal spaces aligned perfectly with their soteriological vision. This theological framework provided sophisticated explanations for her involvement in both necromancy and mystery initiations, as both activities involve facilitating the movement of the soul between different levels of consciousness and existence. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, the collection of mystical texts known as the Chaldean oracles presented Hekate as the cosmic mediator, facilitating communication between the transcendent realm of pure spirit and the material world of physical existence. These oracles described her as the fire-bearing goddess, the deity whose divine flame provided the energy necessary to maintain the connection between different cosmic levels. This theological development transformed her traditional association with torches and fire into a sophisticated metaphysical principle, explaining how divine influence could manifest in the physical world while retaining its spiritual essence. The practical consequences of this Chaldean theology birthed new forms of religious practice that emphasized the direct mystical experience of Hecate's presence over traditional worship through sacrifices and prayers. Advanced practitioners strove to reach states of consciousness that allowed them to perceive the goddess's cosmic fire directly, and to participate in her mediating function between the levels of reality. These practices, known as theurgy, or god-working, required extensive preparation and training, yet they promised the practitioner the possibility of achieving a divine union and cosmic understanding that transcended ordinary human limitations. The spread of Hecate's cult throughout the Roman Empire created a vast network of interconnected religious communities that maintained communication and coordination despite the immense distances separating them. Inscriptional evidence recovered from territories stretching from the mists of Britain to the deserts of Syria reveals consistent patterns of worship, demonstrating the regular exchange of ritual knowledge and theological developments between different regional centres. This network allowed for the rapid dissemination of new practices and interpretations, while preserving the essential unity of the Hecatean religious tradition across diverse cultural contexts. The military colonies established by Roman legions throughout the empire served as significant vectors for spreading Hecate's worship. Soldiers, living constantly in the shadow of death, valued her protection during perilous campaigns and her guidance during the difficult transitions from military to civilian life. Veterans settling in the frontier zones often established temples dedicated to the goddess, creating focal points for the developing civilian communities and establishing permanent centres of worship that persisted long after the original military purposes had been fulfilled. Archaeological excavations at former military sites consistently reveal evidence of Hekate worship, including crossroads shrines, subterranean chambers, and ritual deposits, demonstrating the continuity of her cult over the centuries. The adaptation of Hecate's worship to local conditions throughout the empire created fascinating variations in ritual practice and theological emphasis, while preserving the recognizable core elements defining her essential nature. The Celtic communities in Gaul and Britain associated her with their own indigenous goddesses, who held dominion over war, fate, and the otherworld, creating syncretic forms that emphasized her role as a battle goddess and a guide for the souls of warriors. The Germanic tribes identified her with their own deities controlling magic and prophecy, leading to the development of ritual practices that combined Mediterranean crossroads worship with Northern European shamanic traditions. The persistence of Hecate's cult in the late imperial period, when many traditional pagan religions faced increasing pressure from the expanding Christian Church, demonstrated the deep roots of devotion to her and the practical value her worship provided to ancient communities. Even when public temples were shuttered and official support for pagan religions was withdrawn, private devotion to Hekate continued through household shrines, secret societies, and individual practitioners who preserved traditional knowledge despite official disapproval. The final classical sources documenting Hecate's worship and mythology provide evidence of a remarkable continuity in her essential characteristics. Despite the profound political and cultural changes sweeping the ancient world, even as the twilight age that marked the end of the ancient world descended like a shroud over civilizations, the writings of late pagan philosophers such as Iamblichus and Proclus continued to present Hekate not merely as a goddess, but as a cosmic principle whose authority transcended the boundaries of traditional religious categories. These profound thinkers conceived of her as a divine force, operating according to eternal and immutable principles, rather than historical accidents or fleeting events. This understanding rendered the worship of Hekate eternally valid and relevant, independent of the stormy winds of changing political circumstances or passing cultural fashions. The magical practices identified with the cult of Hekate proved to be particularly resilient, standing firm like an unshakable root against attempts at suppression and prohibition, for these practices addressed fundamental human needs, healing, protection, and guidance, that remained constant regardless of how the religious and political context shifted. The arts of distilling healing from the essence of plants, the talismanic construction of protective amulets, and the techniques for communicating with spiritual entities, all these had been developed and refined within Hecate's cult over centuries. This ancient reservoir of knowledge continued to flow like an unbroken river, practiced and transmitted by healers, wise women, and folk practitioners who succeeded in preserving the core efficacy and essence of her mysteries, while adapting traditional wisdom to the demands of a new world. The theological depth and sophisticated structural complexity achieved by the cult of Hekate during the high noon of the classical period did not merely vanish into the dust of history, rather, it established the enduring intellectual frameworks that would go on to shape the very spine of Western esoteric traditions for centuries after the fall of the ancient world. Her role as the supreme cosmic mediator, her unparalleled mastery over the delicate processes of transformation and transition, and her absolute authority over those hidden, eldritch forces that operate silently beneath the veneer of ordinary reality, provided models of divine power that were astonishingly resilient. These models proved capable of adapting with a fluid grace to shifting cultural contexts, serving as eternal beacons for those inquiring minds seeking to pierce the veil of truth. The archaeological records unearthed from the soil of the classical world serve as a testament to the extraordinary geographical breadth and the rich cultural diversity of the communities that found her guidance essential for both their spiritual salvation and their practical survival. From the mist-shrouded remote frontier settlements of northern Britain, where Roman legionaries shivered against the cold, to the cosmopolitan, teeming metropolises of Egypt and Asia Minor, the evidence of her cult appears with a remarkable and striking consistency. This widespread veneration demonstrates vividly how the allure and power of Hekate transcended the rigid boundaries of ethnic lineage, social caste, and political allegiance that so often divided the ancient world into rival factions, finding instead a universal resonance in the deepest chambers of the human soul. The enduring legacy bequeathed by the classical worship of Hekate lies not merely in its historical weight, but in its profound demonstration of how divine power can adapt to the shifting tides of circumstance while preserving those essential core attributes that answer the fundamental cries of the human heart. Her evolution from a shadowed, relatively minor deity of the Titanic order into one of the most widely revered and formidable goddesses of the ancient cosmos, unveils the dynamic, living nature of religious development. It serves as a testament to the capacity of authentic spiritual traditions to root themselves, grow, and flourish across multiple cultures and through the turning of vast historical epochs. As the classical world slowly yielded to the encroachment of new religious and cultural formations, the influence of Hekate did not fade but persisted, her fundamental wisdom preserved in myriad forms to continue guiding those who sought both spiritual truth and practical knowledge. Her eternal vigil at the crossroads of existence, her unshakable dedication to shepherding souls through the terrifying challenges of transformation and passage, and her command over the secret forces that shape the fabric of reality established her as one of the most resilient and influential deities in the entire history of human religious experience. This goddess, who had stood witness to the very dawn of civilization and watched the first stumbling steps of humanity, would continue to offer her lantern's light to those attempting to navigate the labyrinthine mysteries of existence. Upon those thin, mist-laden thresholds that separate the known from the unknown, the mortal from the divine, and the fleeting, ephemeral moment from the vastness of the eternal, she would maintain her ancient and unshakable watch forever.